Hello everyone, I know you are going to use this video for falling asleep, so before that, like this video, subscribe to the channel and let me know where you are from, also what time is it. You never forget the sound. It wasn't loud, not at first, but it had a way of sliding under your skin. At night, when the house settled into silence, it would begin, a murmur at first, faint, almost like the wind slipping through a crack in the wall. But it wasn't wind. It was voices, whispering. Always just below hearing, always shifting. By the time you realized they were speaking to you, it was too late. Elliot Grayson hadn't meant to inherit the place. It was one of those freak occurrences, the kind you laugh off until it lands at your feet. A letter in the mail, a distant relative he'd never met, dead, no next of kin but him. And just like that, he owned a massive Victorian house in the forgotten town of Dagger Hill. He arrived on a Wednesday afternoon. The town itself looked like it had been dipped in sepia and left to dry out in the sun. Peeling paint, sagging power lines, and silence that didn't feel like peace. More like something had sucked all the noise away and buried it deep in the dirt. The house sat at the end of a long gravel road, flanked by trees that looked more like watchers than plants. Gnarled, hunched, leaning toward the house like they were listening. The house, Greystone Hollow, was beautiful once. You could tell. But now the wood was weather, beaten. The porch steps groaned like they remembered every soul who'd ever climbed them. And the windows weren't just broken. They were missing. Hollow sockets where glass used to be, staring out at him with an emptiness that felt personal. The first thing Elliot noticed when he stepped inside was the temperature. It was August, but the air inside was cold. Not just cool, cold. The kind that made his skin pucker and his lungs seize. Dust swirled in the light pouring through broken blinds. The floorboards creaked beneath his feet like they resented being disturbed. He moved slowly, every step deeper into the house, like walking into the throat of some great beast. The living room was mostly intact. Furniture under white sheets. A fireplace with blackened brick. Above it, a painting. Not a landscape. A portrait. A woman, pale eyes too wide, lips drawn thin. Something about her made his stomach twist, like he was being watched by something that didn't blink. He didn't sleep the first night. The house made sounds. Not the kind you expect from an old place. No groans or settling beams. No, these were intentional. Soft footsteps upstairs when no one was there. The slow drag of something across the floor. And that whispering, starting around midnight. Right above his room. Words he couldn't quite hear, but could feel. By the second day, the air inside the house began to change. It smelled like wet earth, old metal, and something sweeter. Something rotten. Elliot found himself drawn to the basement door. It was sealed with a chain and padlock. The key wasn't anywhere in the house. He checked drawers, searched behind paintings, even tore through the attic. Nothing. But every night, the whispering would start. Louder. Closer. And the lock on the basement door looked different. More worn. Like someone was trying to open it from the inside. That night, he heard the knocking. Just 3 slow raps against his bedroom door. When he flung it open, there was nothing there. Nothing except a trail of dirt leading down the hallway. Wet footprints. Bare. Small. By the 4th night, he wasn't alone in the house. Elliot woke to the sound of breathing. Not his. Deep. Slow. Inhale, hold. Exhale. Right beside his bed. But when he turned on the lamp, there was nothing. Just the heavy imprint on the mattress beside him. Like someone had just risen. He left the light on after that. Then the walls began to bleed. Not real blood, not at first, just streaks. Thin, rusty trails running down the hallway near the attic. He touched one. It was warm. Sticky. The kind of warm that had no place in a house that cold. That night, the whispers turned into voices, and he could finally understand them. Don't go into the basement. Don't open the door. Don't let her out. They said it over and over again. But he hadn't planned to. Not until he saw the journal. He found it tucked behind a false panel in the upstairs study. Black leather, cracked with age. Inside were pages of neat cursive. A woman's handwriting. Elizabeth Grayson, it read. The date, August 1907. The entries started normal. Life in the house. The move to Dagger Hill. But then things shifted. Mentions of dreams. Of a girl in the walls. Of hearing someone cry behind the mirror. Of a cold hand touching her face at night. The final pages were unhinged. Scrawls. Scribbles. Warnings. She lives in the basement. The walls are her mouth. She watches from the floorboards. The key is in her teeth. Elliot didn't sleep that night. The house pulsed around him. Every corner seemed to breathe. The lights flickered even though the power hadn't been connected. His phone wouldn't charge. His car wouldn't start, and the town, Dagger Hill, had gone quiet, as if it had never existed outside the house. On the 6th day, he found the doll. It was left on the kitchen table. He hadn't placed it there. It wore a white dress, singed at the bottom. One of the glass eyes was cracked. A note was pinned to its chest in the same handwriting from the journal. She wants a face. That night, something scratched at the inside of the basement door. Not an animal. No claws. Fingernails. He boarded it up. But the whispering didn't stop. It changed. Let us out. And then the dreams came. Not dreams, really. Memories. But not his. He saw through someone else's eyes. A young girl, locked in the basement, crying in the dark. A woman screaming above, her voice raw with fear. Men with ropes. The basement flooded in red, then silence. Cold. Loneliness so thick it made his chest ache. He woke up with dirt under his fingernails. Dirt that matched the floor near the basement door. And then, on the 7th day, Elliot made a mistake. He followed the whispers. They led him through the attic. Behind the chimney. To a crawl space. It was barely big enough for him to fit. But something pulled him in. At the end of the narrow tunnel, wrapped in cloth, was a jawbone. Human. Child-sized. Inside, nestled between the teeth, was a brass key. That night, he dreamed of the portrait in the living room. The woman's eyes moved. Her mouth opened. And she whispered, "Now it begins." When he woke, the house had changed. The walls bulged like they were breathing. The floor sagged. The portrait was gone. In its place was a mirror. And in that mirror was not his reflection. It was her, the woman from the portrait, standing behind him, smiling. And then the basement door opened by itself. He didn't open it. He swears he didn't. But there it was, hanging ajar. The chain snapped. The lock twisted off and rusted through like it had been eaten from the inside. He stood at the top of the stairs. The darkness below wasn't normal. It was thick, heavy, moving. He should have run. Any sane person would have. But he didn't. He stood there, listening. And then a voice said his name. Not whispered. Spoken. And it was his mother's voice. But his mother had been dead for 5 years. He took the first step down. He never heard the front door slam shut behind him. Never saw the windows go black. Never noticed the blood dripping from the ceiling. He only saw her, at the bottom of the stairs. Pale, grinning, her mouth too wide, her arms too long. Her eyes, they weren't eyes. They were mirrors, and inside them, he saw every nightmare he'd ever forgotten. She opened her mouth, and he screamed. But no one in Dagger Hill heard, because Dagger Hill wasn't real anymore. Greystone Hollow had swallowed it whole, and it had just begun to digest. Elliot's scream died before it reached the air. It didn't echo. It didn't bounce. It was devoured, pulled into the yawning dark of the basement like everything else that tried to fight the silence. The woman at the bottom of the stairs didn't move, not at first. She stood perfectly still, like a figure carved from wax, real but not alive. Her eyes still shimmered like twin mirrors, but they no longer reflected him. Instead, they showed something deeper. Moving shapes, flickers of fire, the suggestion of teeth, a hallway lined with doors that breathed, and in each one, a shadow pressed against the inside, trying to get out. Elliot backed up, his foot catching the edge of a warped board on the top step. His breath came out in ragged bursts, fogging the air despite the summer heat. When he looked down again, she was gone. Not footsteps, not a retreat. She had vanished like smoke, but the door remained open. And the whispers, they changed. They no longer begged for help. They no longer warned him. Now they laughed. Dozens of voices, some high and childlike, others low and broken, like something that had been trying to speak with a crushed throat, all of them familiar, not just strangers, people he'd forgotten. His third-grade teacher. A boy from the park who had vanished one autumn and was never found. His father. Elliot slammed the basement door shut. This time, he nailed it closed. But the whispers didn't stop. The next morning, he found a crack in the mirror that had replaced the portrait. A hairline fracture running diagonally through the center like a wound. When he leaned close, he didn't see his face. He saw the house. Not how it looked now, but how it must have once been. Clean, bright, alive. And standing in the doorway was Elizabeth Grayson. She held a baby in her arms, smiling, laughing, turning to someone behind her who never came into view. As he watched, the image flickered, the walls blackened, the floor split. Elizabeth screamed, but not from fear, from rage. And then the mirror cracked again, this time from the inside. Elliot stumbled back, clutching the banister, his chest tight. That night, the house changed again. Time broke. He didn't realize it at first. He thought he was just tired. Maybe it was the lack of sleep, or the damp cold that had sunk into his bones. But as the sun set, he realized it wasn't the first time that day it had set. In fact, it had gone down 3 times since morning. Each time, the light dimmed slightly differently. Once golden, then purple, then a sickly green. The clocks no longer moved, or they moved backward, sometimes faster than the eye could follow, and his phone showed a date from 1953. He sat on the living room floor, clutching the journal. The entries had changed. New pages had appeared, ones he hadn't seen before. They weren't dated. They weren't even in Elizabeth's handwriting. One read, "She fed last night. The walls are softer now. I saw my brother walking in the hallway again. He's been dead for 7 years. I think the house is showing me what it wants me to remember." Another, "The baby cries from the basement. I didn't go down there, but I think she wants me to. I think she wants me to bring him back. And the last one, time is a mouth. It chews slowly here. Some days last forever, others vanish, but the worst part, you forget, not all at once, in pieces, faces first, then names, then the sound of your own voice, until all that's left is her." Elliot dropped the book and ran for the front door. It didn't open, not just locked. Gone. The wood had fused with the wall. No hinges, no knob. As if it had never been a door. As if it had been part of the house all along. The windows were next. He tried them all. But when he looked out, it wasn't Dagger Hill he saw. It was the house again. The same room. From a different angle. Like the house had folded in on itself, every wall now facing inward, trapping him inside a loop. He screamed again. This time, it didn't matter. He wasn't just alone. He was erased. The floor beneath his feet groaned, not the regular creak of wood, but something deeper. A wet sound, like meat tearing. He backed away, but the hallway stretched longer than before. The rooms shifted places. The kitchen door now led to the attic. The study opened into a black tunnel lined with wallpaper that pulsed. He wrote on the wall with a nail, "Today is Thursday. I am Elliot Grayson. I came here from the city. I am real." He carved it in deep. Then scratched it into his arm, just in case the house tried to take that too. On what he guessed was the 9th day, the house gave him a gift. A phone rang. Old, rotary red. It sat on a table in the upstairs hall, one he swore hadn't been there before. The sound was sharp, cutting. Out of place. He stared at it. Let it ring 13 times before he picked it up. There was no voice, only breathing. Then a whisper. A child's voice. "Don't trust the mirrors. She lives in the glass now. She needs faces. That's how she feeds. Then silence. When he looked up, every mirror in the house had fogged over, and faces began to appear. He smashed them one by one. But the reflections didn't stop. He saw himself sleeping, eating, standing in corners he'd never been. In one, he watched himself pull open the basement door again, smiling. But he had no eyes. The next day, or maybe it was the same day, Elliot found the music box. It played on its own. A soft lullaby that echoed through the walls. Every time it finished, it rewound itself. He followed the sound to what should have been the guest bedroom. But inside was a nursery, freshly painted. Toys scattered neatly. A crib, rocking chair. The walls were white, new, not a speck of dust, as if it had been frozen in time. But on the mobile above the crib hung 5 things. Each one was a tooth, human. Elliot approached the crib, and the mobile stopped. Then the crying started, a baby's cry. From the basement, low, ragged, wet. He turned toward the sound, heart hammering. But then something else joined it, louder. From behind the wall, he ran, through the halls, down the stairs. But each room he passed was different now. Warped, inverted, the house was rearranging itself. He passed the same painting 3 times, heard the same knock twice, and at the base of the stairs, the basement door hung open again. The nails he had used were gone. On the floor, carved into the wood, were words Waiuli Tihar Men. That night, the sky outside turned red, a heavy, simmering red that lit the house from below. Shadows stretched wrong, upward like hands reaching for help, or to pull something down. Elliot sat by the fireplace, not daring to move. The flames had gone cold, burning without heat. The whispering had returned. But now it wasn't coming from the basement. It was coming from inside the walls. They spoke in unison. She remembers you. And then she wants you to remember her. The mirror in the hallway shattered by itself. Elliot didn't move. In the shards he saw her again. But this time she was crying. Not blood, not water, glass. Tiny, sharp tears that slid down her face and cut open her smile. She mouthed something, and he understood. You were the baby. He didn't remember falling asleep, but when he woke the journal had moved. It now sat beside him. Open, blank, and across the page, written in blood, were new words. It's your turn to write the story now. The pen was warm. The page pulsed. And somewhere, behind the walls, the baby cried again. But this time, it sounded older. And it was saying his name. The ink wouldn't dry. Elliot stared at the page, watching the crimson words writhe across the paper, as though the journal breathed beneath his fingertips. The sentence repeated itself every time he blinked. It's your turn to write the story now. But the words weren't static. They shifted, melted, and formed again. Same meaning, different voices. He closed the journal, but the whispering continued inside his head, as though the page had slipped behind his eyes and begun writing on the walls of his mind. The house had grown hungry. He hadn't eaten in days. Or maybe he had. He couldn't remember. The kitchen changed each time he entered. Once, he found it packed with rotted food, the smell so thick it stuck to his throat. Another time, the fridge was brand new, humming with a mechanical life of its own, stocked with food that looked perfect but turned to ash in his mouth. Once, he reached into a cabinet and pulled out his own hand, cold and gray. Already dead, he hadn't opened that cabinet again. Elliot began to understand the rhythm of the house. It wasn't madness. It was memory. It forced you to relive what you forgot, twist it, stretch it, make you question the truth of it. One hallway led to a hospital waiting room he hadn't seen in decades. A doctor with no face stood at the end, holding a chart that bled through the pages. He didn't read it. He didn't need to. His father had died there, alone. The hallway returned to wood and wallpaper before his knees hit the floor. Each door was a trap, and each room was a riddle. He passed by the nursery again. This time it was burned. The crib was scorched black, melted into the floorboards. Ash floated in the air like snow. But the mobile still hung from the ceiling, spinning slowly. A voice whispered from the chair in the corner. "Are you ready to hold him now?" He ran before the chair turned around. The mirrors weren't mirrors anymore. They had become eyes. Not watching, remembering. Reflecting things he'd done and forgotten, or worse, things he might still do. One showed him holding the brass key over the crib, weeping as something invisible pulled the child from his arms. Another showed him laughing as he nailed the basement door shut from the outside, walking away as screams echoed behind the wood. But it wasn't him. It couldn't have been. Could it? There were two of him now. Sometimes he would catch a glimpse at the end of a hallway, a flicker of movement, a figure with his face but not his eyes. The reflection never blinked, never moved unless he did. But once, just once, it smiled on its own. He stopped looking at mirrors after that. Then came the clock room. He found it behind a door that used to lead to the closet. Inside, every inch of the walls was lined with clocks. Grandfather clocks, pocket watches, digital timers. None of them ticked in sync. The noise was unbearable, a chorus of time unraveling, screaming through mismatched gears. And in the center of the room stood a single, empty crib. Carved into its side, beneath the peeling paint, were the words, "You left us behind." As Elliot stepped forward, the clocks all stopped. The room fell into suffocating silence. And then the crying began, not from the crib, from the clocks. Each one wailed like a child, different tones, different rhythms. Some shallow, newborn sobs, others deep, older, resentful. He clutched his ears and stumbled out, only to find himself in a hallway he hadn't seen before, lined with doors that had no handles. Behind one, a man whispered prayers. Behind another, something clawed at the wood, and one simply pulsed. He knew that one led to her, the woman, Elizabeth. She wasn't a ghost. That much had become clear. Ghosts haunt places. She was the place, not the spirit of it, but the body, the soul. The teeth, every creaking stair, every cracking mirror, every breath of cold air. It was her exhaling through the lungs of the house. Elliot could feel her watching him now, not from the shadows, but from beneath the floorboards, like she'd grown roots there, waiting, starving. And still, the journal called to him. He found it again, sitting on the piano. No dust, no blood, clean. The page had turned. Tell the truth, Elliot. You remember more than you admit. He didn't want to remember. But the house did. The walls trembled that night, not from wind, from something deeper. A shudder that passed through the foundation like a muscle contracting. The chandelier in the foyer exploded. The floor buckled beneath his bed, and through the roar of breaking wood and splintering glass came a new sound, a knock. 3 soft knocks. But not at the basement door. At his window. He should have been on the 2nd floor, but when he pulled back the curtain, there she was. Elizabeth, standing in the snow. Snow. There hadn't been snow yesterday, not even clouds. And yet, the world outside was white and silent. Trees stood frozen. The ground cracked with frost. And in the center of the yard she waited, holding something. It was the journal. He didn't go outside. Not yet. Instead, he found the painting. The one that had disappeared. It was back, hanging above the fireplace. But the woman's eyes were no longer blank. They were his. Her smile twisted into something too familiar. The background had changed too. Instead of a generic Victorian backdrop, the painting now showed the house, burning, and in the bottom right corner, a child watched from the woods, his face. The truth hit him like cold water. This wasn't about a haunting. This wasn't some random inheritance. This house had been waiting for him. Not just for weeks, for years, decades. Since the day it burned. Since the day he was carried out and someone else was left behind. He ran outside into the snow barefoot, screaming her name. "Elizabeth, what do you want from me?" But the yard was empty. The snow gone. The trees green again. And the journal now sat on the ground at his feet, open to a page that hadn't been there before. It showed a drawing. A woman holding a child. The child had no face. And in scrawled handwriting beneath it, he was supposed to be ours. That night, the house spoke to him for the first time, not in whispers, not in dreams, but in his own voice. Echoing through the vents, the pipes, the fireplace, it repeated the same sentence again and again. You left her behind. You left her behind. You left her behind, until it sounded less like blame and more like a command. And in the final moments before sleep took him, Elliot remembered something. A moment, a flash. He was in the crib. The fire was everywhere. Someone was screaming his name, and a woman was pulling him away while another woman reached out from behind the flames. Both called him son. Only one made it out, and the house, her house, never let go. Because it doesn't forget. And now, neither could he. The house no longer slept. Every creak of the floor, every shift in the walls, every groan from the pipes was intentional. Alive. And Elliot, now, wasn't just trapped inside it. He was part of it. Somewhere between day and night, time had collapsed again. The clocks in the hallway spun backwards in silence. His watch bled a slow black liquid down his wrist. When he looked into the mirror in the foyer, he saw not his reflection but a hallway that didn't exist, one with walls covered in soot, fire, blackened wallpaper. A crib still smoldering in the corner. He stopped looking into mirrors entirely after that. He tried to fight the memories at first, to force them back into the dark corners of his mind where he had kept them buried for most of his life. But the house was unrelenting. It wanted him to remember, and every inch of it was tailored to make that happen. The walls whispered names he hadn't heard since he was a child. The smell of lavender, his mother's perfume, drifted through the vents. Once, he heard her humming a lullaby from the attic, the same one she used to sing when the storms outside frightened him. Only she wasn't there. She couldn't be. His mother had died in a fire, but now he wasn't sure which woman had burned. One night Elliot awoke to find the journal in his lap again. He hadn't touched it, hadn't moved. He'd stopped writing in it days ago, but now the pages were filled. Dozens of entries in his own handwriting, none of which he remembered writing. The ink was brown, flaking, dried like old blood. One entry caught his eye, and as he read, the words pulsed beneath his fingertips. She gave everything to save you, and you forgot her name. Another fire takes the body, not the bond. You were hers, and you were taken. The page turned on its own. A drawing filled the space. Charcoal, violent strokes. It showed the house burning from within, not outside. The flames curled inward, as if the house wasn't being destroyed, but birthed. In the center of the drawing was a woman holding a baby, and surrounding her dozens of shadowy figures stood in silence. Watching, waiting, smiling. He slammed the book shut and threw it into the fireplace. It screamed. The scream wasn't human. It wasn't even from the book. It came from the walls. A low, soul, deep wail that turned his bones to ice. The fire in the hearth shot up like a living thing, blue and tall, licking the ceiling. And for a moment, just a moment, the house stopped. Everything, the whispers, the breathing, the pulsing in the floors, all of it ceased. And then the house exhaled, hard. The windows shattered inward, glass like teeth. The doors slammed in unison. And from somewhere deep within the walls, Elliot heard laughter, high, lilting, and full of something that used to be joy, but had decayed into something twisted. He didn't sleep that night. Not because of fear, but because he knew the house would take him into its memories again. The dreams weren't dreams. They were visits. Long walks through timelines he didn't understand. One moment he was a baby in the crib, watching a woman scream through flames. The next, he was outside the house, watching it rebuild itself. Then he was in the woods, watching men with shovels bury something that whispered from the earth. A name, over and over, Elizabeth. He'd begun to say it in his sleep. The next morning he found a door that hadn't been there before. It was narrow. Too narrow. just wide enough for a child to slip through. It led to a crawlspace, low and pitch black. But Elliot didn't hesitate this time. The house didn't want him to hesitate. He crawled through the dust, through the smell of old rot and mildew, past bones that had been cleaned by time. Rats watched him with dull eyes but didn't move. At the end of the crawlspace was a room. Or what had once been a room. Charred beams hung overhead like broken ribs. The floor was scorched, and in the center stood a single rocking chair, burnt, barely upright, and in the chair, her. She was no longer human. Whatever had remained of Elizabeth Grayson's body was long gone. But something had shaped itself in her likeness. Ash, suit, shadow. She sat perfectly still, her face a collection of blurred features, like smoke trying to remember how to form a face. Her hands rested on her lap, charcoal fingers, broken nails. In her lap was the journal, the same one he had burned. Unharmed, Elliot stared at her, heart pounding. She didn't speak, but he heard her, not with ears, with memory. "I gave you everything," she said inside his mind. "I burned for you. You forgot me." He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. She stood slowly. And when she did, the chair crumbled to ash. Her feet didn't touch the ground. Her body floated slightly, like paper in wind. And behind her, the room folded open. A hallway revealed itself, lined with doors. One of them pulsed like a heartbeat. She pointed to it. And then she was gone. Elliot walked to the door. He didn't question it. Something in his chest had cracked open. A part of him that remembered the warmth of her arms, the way she sang to him, the way she screamed his name through the smoke. He opened the door. It wasn't a hallway. It was the fire. It swallowed him whole, and in the fire he saw everything. The truth. His birth mother hadn't died that night. She had taken him to Greystone Hollow, fleeing from something, hiding. Elizabeth had taken them in, fed them, sheltered them. She had loved the boy like her own, but then the baby got sick, and one night the house burned. Not by accident, not by mistake. The fire had been called, by a name no one remembered, an offering, a debt. Something old and buried beneath the roots of Dagger Hill, something that fed on love turned to grief. Elliot wasn't the only child taken from the fire. He was the one who made it out, but he wasn't meant to. The house had chosen him, and now it was calling him back. He awoke on the floor of the nursery. This time, it wasn't burned, it was perfect. New. The crib rocked on its own. A lullaby played from the mobile. The air was warm, and standing in the doorway was Elizabeth, not burned, not ash, alive, smiling. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she stepped forward and whispered, "Welcome home." And Elliot, tired, broken, and heavy with memory, took her hand. Behind him, the house began to seal itself again, because the house never lets go. It only waits. Elliot didn't know how long he stood there, hand in hers. Elizabeth's fingers were cold. Colder than any living person should be, but they didn't tremble. They gripped his with the quiet finality of someone who had been waiting far too long to let go now. Her eyes, no longer made of glass or ash or smoke, were vividly real, too real. A shade of blue he recognized, not because he'd seen it often, but because it had haunted him from forgotten dreams. His earliest memories, of lullabies he hadn't known he remembered, of arms that held him before the flames, were wrapped in that same cold blue. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. Elliot let her guide him through the nursery, down the stairs, and into the house that had changed again. The walls, once blistered and cracked, were flawless. The portraits that lined the hallway no longer held ghostly faces or moved when he passed. They were still, fixed. Elizabeth led him past them without pause, though he couldn't help but notice something strange about them now. Every painting was of the same room. Different eras, different lighting, but always the same place, the basement. In one, it was sealed shut, the chain glinting like a warning. In another, it was wide open, and a shape crouched just beyond the bottom step, almost visible in the shadows. In a third, The room was filled with water, and something floated face down at the center. He tried to look away, but they felt like mirrors, reflecting not the past, but futures, possible ones, each worse than the last. Elizabeth stopped in front of the basement door. It was no longer damaged, no longer rusted or chained or bleeding from its hinges. It looked brand new. The wood was polished. The knob gleamed. It hummed with a kind of energy Elliot could feel in his molars, low and bone deep. She turned to him, her mouth finally opening. What was taken must be returned. The voice was hers and not hers. It was layered, like a dozen voices all speaking in perfect unison. Some young, some ancient, some filled with sorrow, others with hunger. Elliot's spine stiffened under its weight. What do you mean? He asked. Though part of him already knew. Elizabeth blinked slowly. You were given, offered. Plucked from fire to balance what burned. The sentence didn't make sense, not in the way normal speech did. It felt more like a law being recited, something old and unbreakable, carved into the marrow of the house. I didn't ask for any of this, Elliot whispered. I didn't choose to come back. You don't choose where you're born, she said, stepping aside, gesturing toward the door. But you choose what kind of ghost you become. The knob turned with barely a sound. The door opened not with a creak, but a breath, as though the house itself was inhaling. Inside was darkness. Not the kind that simply blocked vision, but the kind that made the rest of the world disappear. A silence so thick it felt like falling. She didn't follow him in. He stepped inside alone. The descent wasn't measured in steps. There were no walls, no railing, no defined end. Only the feeling of downward. The deeper he went, the heavier his limbs became. His breath slowed. Sound vanished completely, until there was nothing left but heartbeat, not his own, another one, beneath him, around him, inside him. And then the world flickered. The basement emerged not as it had been, but as it had once been. Clean, lined with candles. A circle drawn into the floorboards with something black and tar-like. Symbols etched into the wood, some still glowing faintly. And in the center of the room, a crib. The same crib. But this time, it wasn't empty. He approached slowly. The baby inside slept peacefully, wrapped in a white blanket too clean for this place. His fingers hovered just above the rail. He felt her then. Elizabeth. But she wasn't behind him. She was beneath him. The floor pulsed. The circle flared. And from the edge of the dark, the walls began to breathe. You were taken, her voice whispered. Everywhere and nowhere. But something else took your place. He looked down. The baby's eyes opened, and they were his. Not metaphorically, literally. He stumbled back. The crib remained still, the child staring at him, mouth parting in a silent scream that never came. Then the floor began to rot. Fast. The boards blackened underfoot. Mold spread in spiderwebs. The candlelight snapped to blue flame. The house was feeding. On memory. On presence. On him. He turned to run, but the stairs were gone. Only the crib remained, and the baby now stood in it, no longer infant-sized. Growing. Warping. Its limbs stretched in wrong directions. The face stayed his, but the body became thin, wary, bent at unnatural angles. It climbed over the side with inhuman grace, standing barefoot on the now slick floor, grinning wide with a mouth full of soot-stained teeth. You forgot. It hissed in his voice. So now I remember. Elliot backed into the wall, heart thrashing against his ribs like it wanted out. The creature stalked closer, footsteps silent. Every time it blinked, it changed shape. Boy, teenager, man, corpse. The possible versions of who he could have been had he stayed. Had he burned. Had the house kept him from ever leaving. I am the part you left behind, it whispered. And then it lunged. But it didn't touch him. Instead, it passed through him. And in that instant, Elliot saw everything. The fire. The real one. Elizabeth hadn't said it. She had tried to stop it. The house had burned because something else had awakened beneath it. Something ancient. Not a demon. Not a god. Something older. It had fed on sorrow. On regret. On guilt. Elizabeth had made a deal long ago, a deal to save someone she loved. But the deal demanded more than she gave. It demanded Elliot. And now it had both. When he came to, he was outside. The house was behind him, silent, still, but different. It was full now, no longer searching. The windows were lit. The walls no longer shifted. It looked complete. He looked down. In his hands was the journal. The last page was blank, but still wet. Waiting. Behind him the front door of Greystone Hollow creaked closed. And in the wind, a whisper curled around his neck like smoke. You came home. But when Elliot turned to look, he saw a child, stepping up the porch, holding a letter, and the house opened its door again. The boy was no older than 8. His hair stuck up in the back, messy in a way only children could carry without shame. He held a yellow envelope in both hands, clutching it to his chest like it contained treasure, or maybe instructions. The way he moved was too sure, too deliberate for a child wandering alone. He didn't look left or right. He didn't call for help. He walked straight up to the door of Greystone Hollow, as if he'd been there before. As if something inside had been calling to him all along. Elliot didn't know where he was standing anymore. The road behind him had vanished. There were no trees, no town. No sky even, just a flat, pulsing gray above and below, like he stood suspended in the blink of the house's eye. And that eye was fixed squarely on the boy. Don't... Elliot tried to say, but his voice came out broken, chewed up like everything else that had passed through this place. The boy reached the top step. The door opened without a knock. Not slowly, not with eerie theatricality. No, it simply opened. Quiet, patient. The kind of opening you'd expect from a home long abandoned and eager to breathe again. And he stepped inside. Just like Elliot had. The door didn't close behind him. Not yet. Elliot tried to follow, but his feet didn't work. His body, weightless in the moment before, suddenly felt pinned to the earth, like gravity had increased tenfold. His fingers twitched at his sides. His mouth wouldn't move. He was frozen. But the journal in his hands grew warm again. He looked down. A new line had appeared on the last page. He has her eyes. His breath caught in his throat. The boy. He turned his head toward the open door again. Light spilled from the entry, golden and soft, beckoning. He wanted to scream, to run forward, to grab the boy and pull him out before the house shut its teeth. But then the light changed. The color turned. What had been warm turned sterile. White, then flickering orange, then deep crimson, like fire behind thin paper. Elliot took a step forward. His body no longer felt entirely his, more like a puppet half freed from its strings. The journal slipped from his hands and fell open at his feet, pages fluttering as if the wind had returned. But there was no wind here. The house was breathing again, and he was caught in its exhale. As he stepped through the threshold, something changed. He felt it in his bones first. A crackle, like something adjusting to make space for him. Greystone Hollow remembered him. Not as an intruder, not even as a victim, as part of it. The house didn't resist his entrance. It welcomed it. Inside, the entryway looked the same, and different. The walls were painted with light that didn't come from any visible source. It danced across the floor like reflections from water. The portraits were gone now, replaced with mirrors, long, tall, each one distorted. As Elliot walked past them, he didn't see himself. He saw her. Elizabeth, carrying a baby, standing in the fire, smiling as the flames curled around her dress. The boy was already deep in the house. No sound from his feet. No voice. No hesitation. He walked as if he'd lived there for years. Wait, Elliot croaked. Please, stop. The boy paused, just for a second, and then he turned. His face wasn't blank. It wasn't cruel. It was familiar. Too familiar. Elliot took a step closer, and the boy tilted his head, curious, confused, like he was trying to place the memory of a dream. And then Elliot saw it, the eyes. They weren't just Elizabeth's. They were his, too. But he opened his mouth. But before he could speak, the hallway folded. not like collapsing beams or crumbling walls. The space folded, creased like paper, twisting in on itself with a slow, motion snap that reverberated in his teeth. The boy vanished around the bend, and the walls sealed behind him. Elliot ran forward, fists pounding on the wood. No sound. No give. Only the smooth, perfect surface of a house that had made its decision. He stumbled back, gasping. The walls pulsed once, then twice, then stopped. A familiar humming filled the space. That lullaby, the mobile's music. But it wasn't coming from upstairs anymore. It came from everywhere, like the house was humming to itself, rocking something to sleep. Elliot turned in slow circles, trying to find a way out. A staircase, a crack, anything. But the house wasn't offering paths anymore. It was offering memory. The walls began to flicker like screens, not pictures, scenes, one after the next. Elliot as a child, playing in the attic with building blocks he'd long forgotten. Hiding under the dining room table during a thunderstorm. Running through the halls laughing, a woman's footsteps echoing behind him. Not his mother, not the woman who raised him. Elizabeth, she had been everything, and she had been taken. By the fire, by him. He watched it all play out. A child loved, then snatched. A house burned, then rebuilt. And somewhere deep below, the fire still burned. Not as flame, but as will, as hunger. The boy wasn't a mistake. He was the next one in. Another child pulled into the cycle. Another body the house could shape and swallow. And now, Elliot understood. This house didn't haunt. It recruited. It built itself from those it claimed. Memory became mortar. Regret became the nails. And love, the twisted, broken kind, held the roof together. It didn't matter who the child was. Only that the house remembered the pain of losing one. And it needed to balance the scale. A voice hummed in his left ear, low and clear. She never stopped singing for you. He turned. A door now stood beside him. One he hadn't seen. No handle. Just the sound behind it. Breathing. Not heavy, not labored. Infant breathing. He pressed his hand to the wood. Warm. Alive. And the voice again, softer this time, "Come meet your brother." The house groaned above. A slow, stretching sound. And Elliot, too tired to fight, too broken to question, pushed the door open. Inside was a nursery. Not ash. Not soot. Just light. A crib in the middle, and two shadows, his, and one smaller, fell across the floor. The door closed behind him. But this time, he didn't scream. The nursery was impossibly quiet. Not the kind of quiet that comes before sleep, but the kind that comes after a scream has echoed so long and loud that even sound itself forgets how to return. Elliot stood in the doorway, half in shadow, half in golden light, staring at the crib in the center of the room. It rocked gently. Not with the rhythm of motion, but like something had just climbed into it and made a place for itself. He didn't move. His legs were stiff, locked. His fingers curled slightly at his sides, twitching with a tremble that hadn't left him since the basement. The air smelled of powdered milk, old books, and something more familiar. A scent he couldn't quite name, but that hit somewhere deep in the chest, between memory and grief. Like warm blankets and bedtime stories, like the part of his childhood he thought had burned away in the fire. But this nursery hadn't burned. It looked new. The walls were painted pale blue with soft stars stamped across the top. A mobile spun slowly overhead, chiming a lullaby in a warped music box tone, off by just enough to make his skin crawl. The curtains fluttered slightly, though there was no breeze. And above the crib, scrawled in a child's shaky hand, was a name drawn on the wall in crayon. Goi. Elliot's heart squeezed. The name meant nothing to him. And yet, his legs carried him forward before he realized he'd moved. One step, then another. As he approached the crib, a soft clicking sound echoed behind him, the door latching shut. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. He already knew it was gone. There was never a room, only the door. He reached the crib and peered inside. A baby lay beneath a blanket patterned with moons and clouds. Peaceful, still, Its tiny hands curled into fists, its eyes closed. But something was wrong. Very wrong. The child didn't breathe, not in the normal way. Its chest rose and fell, yes, but the motion wasn't tied to air or lungs. It moved with the house, every pulse in the walls, every flicker of the light, every quiet groan through the floorboards matched the rise and fall of Jonah's body. Like the child was the house's heartbeat, or its anchor, or its prisoner. Elliot leaned in closer, and the baby opened its eyes. They were pitch black. Not the reflective black of dark irises, but an absorbing, endless black, as if two voids had been pushed into a child's skull. And when the child blinked, the air in the nursery dropped 10 degrees. Elliot backed up instinctively, stomach nodding. The baby smiled, and the walls of the room cracked. A fine line began at the top corner, zigzagging down like a bolt of lightning across drywall, splitting paint and plaster with a slow, grinding sound. From within that fracture, a whisper began to leak. Not a voice, but dozens of them. Children, crying, singing, laughing, begging. He clutched his ears, but it wasn't in the air. It was in him. The mobile spun faster. Jonah's smile widened. Teeth showing now, too many teeth. And behind the crib, the wall bulged outward, distorting like something massive was pressing against it from the other side. Fingers formed first, then a hand, imprinting from behind the plaster, then another. The outline of a face pressed forward, stretching the surface like skin, mouth open, eyes wide. Silent scream. Elizabeth. The child gurgled, and behind that sound, Elliot heard words. Hidden, twisted. Feed it, you must. No, he whispered. The baby giggled. The wall tore. Elizabeth's face burst through, but it wasn't Elizabeth anymore. Her skin was waxy and split, eyes nothing but hollows filled with swarming insects that pulsed and hummed like one sick, shared brain. She reached toward Elliot, mouth opening wider than any jaw should allow. You made him, she said. Now finish him. Jonah sat up in the crib, on his own, too strong, too fast, like a puppet yanked by strings. Elliot turned, but there was no door, no handle, only blank wall. The nursery began to shrink, literally. The walls slid inward, groaning. The ceiling bent down. The air thickened, heavy with the scent of burnt cloth and spoiled milk. Jonah climbed over the crib's side and landed on the floor with a wet slap. His bare feet left ash prints behind him. And then he spoke. Where were you when she burned? The voice was deep, adult, laced with betrayal. I don't, Elliot choked. I didn't know. You forgot her, Jonah said. You walked away from the fire. You left her in it. No, Elliot said, pressing his back against the wall. I was just a baby. Exactly. Jonah growled, head tilting, neck cracking. A baby loved, a baby saved, and another left behind. Elizabeth's face twisted with rage. Balance must be restored. Jonah reached into his own chest. Elliot's knees buckled. The child's hand disappeared into flesh like water, and when he pulled it out, he was holding a mirror, small, cracked, and inside it, Elliot saw himself, but not now, as a child, on fire, screaming, burning alive in a crib. Elliot dropped to the floor, shaking. You remember now, Jonah said, and then the room exploded into ash. When Elliot opened his eyes, he was in the foyer again. The house was silent, the baby gone, the nursery never there, and the mirror now lay at his feet, whole. He picked it up slowly. In the glass, he didn't see himself anymore. He saw the house, from the outside, burning, just like before, and a woman, Elizabeth, running into the flames, holding him, and behind her a shadow waiting, arms open, mouth wide, waiting to feed. Elliot stepped back, heart hammering in his chest, but the mirror wouldn't let go. His fingers were stuck. The glass pulsed, and from within it, a voice whispered one final word, return. The mirror refused to release his hand. Elliot pulled, twisted, fought against it with growing desperation, but his fingers remained fixed to the cool glass, as if welded there by memory itself. It didn't feel like he was holding the mirror anymore. It felt like it was holding him. The image inside had stopped moving now. No more flames. No Elizabeth. No house. Just black. A darkness so thick it looked layered, as if something terrible lived just beyond it, pressing close, waiting to be recognized. Then the pulling began. Not physical, not at first, but in his chest, in his skull. There was a pressure, gentle but insistent, like something behind the glass had hooked its fingers around his mind and was tugging it forward. His body resisted, but his thoughts leaned toward the void. He felt the memory of a scream pass through him, not his own, but a scream meant for him, carried across time like a thread sewn into the fabric of his life. He saw flashes. A burned rocking horse, blood on pale wallpaper, the sound of something crawling behind a mirror. Return what was taken. The words weren't spoken aloud, but they rang through him with undeniable weight. He dropped to his knees, panting, cold sweat trickling down his spine. He didn't know what it meant, what was taken. Who took it? And why was it still so hungry? The mirror gave him no answer, but his hand came free, and when it did, it left behind skin. Strips of his palm remained stuck to the glass, red and slick, as if the object had fed off the contact. He stared at his torn flesh, then at the mirror, now cracked down the middle. A new image emerged. A door. Familiar. Not the front door of Greystone Hollow. Not the basement. This one was older. Weathered. A child's scribbles drawn across it. Stick figures. A smiling sun. A name carved into the wood in block letters. ELOT, but with only one L he recognized it. His childhood room. Back in the city. The apartment he grew up in after the fire. A place he hadn't thought about in years. The house wanted him to go back. To the place where his life restarted, and maybe where hers ended. The mirror pulsed once more. And then it shattered. Not into glass, but into pages. Hundreds of paper scraps flurried outward, spinning into the air like leaves caught in a storm. They swirled around him, each one marked with a name, a memory, a moment, a boy's drawing, a girl's lullaby, a child's tooth, a lock of burned hair, a smear of blood shaped like a handprint. When they fell, they vanished on impact, and he was no longer in Greystone Hollow. He stood in a hallway dim with flickering fluorescent light, walls yellowed with time. His old apartment building, 5th floor. He could still remember the weight of his feet on that hideous brown carpet, the smell of reheated food and cigarette smoke, and at the far end of the hall, that door, the one from the mirror, his old room. But the hallway was wrong. The air didn't feel like air. It pressed against him like fog underwater, muffled every step, every breath. Each door along the corridor was shut tight, though behind some he heard things, wet footsteps, shuffling paper, laughter with no source. He moved toward the door. With each step, memories came back, not of Dagger Hill, not of the house, but of after, of the foster homes, the nightmares, the woman in the fire, the questions no one answered. Why did you survive? Why just you? His fingers hovered over the knob. The moment he touched it, the hallway went silent, dead silent. He turned the knob and opened the door. Inside was his childhood bedroom. Toy soldiers on the shelves. A torn Spider-Man poster. The bed sheets rumpled, everything preserved like a museum exhibit. But in the center of the room, sitting on the floor, was a girl, no older than 6, her skin pale and ashen, hair long and tangled, wearing a scorched nightgown. Her head was tilted to one side, her hands in her lap, holding something he couldn't quite make out. When she looked up, Elliot froze. It wasn't just that her eyes were empty sockets. It was that he recognized her. He had seen her in the basement, in the dreams, in the reflection. Not once had she ever looked at him directly, until now. "You're late," she said, voice soft, not accusing. "Just tired. I didn't know." Elliot whispered, "I didn't remember." The girl blinked slowly, her sockets moist with something too dark to be tears. She lifted what she'd been holding, a ragged cloth doll, one arm missing, its face half burned away. "This was mine," she said. "You took it when you left. I didn't take anything. You took her." Elliot dropped to his knees. "I didn't know." "She called your name." The girl continued, rocking slightly now. Not mine. She gave you to the fire. I stayed. I burned. Elliot's vision blurred. The girl stood. But her form no longer matched the size of a child. Her limbs stretched, her back straightened. And suddenly Elizabeth stood before him again, her face flickering between soot, stained and whole, between loving and vengeful. You need to give it back, she said. He shook his head. What do I even have left to give? Her smile was soft, tragic, forgiving. Your name. Then the room tilted. Reality turned inside out. The walls dissolved into smoke, and the floor pulled him downward. He fell, through years, through dreams, through versions of himself he didn't want to remember. And when he landed, he was back in Greystone Hollow. The door behind him slammed shut. The house groaned, welcomed. Inside, the boy was waiting again. Jonah, no longer child, no longer demon, but something else. Whole. He stepped forward, holding the journal in one hand and the mirror in the other. Did you bring it? He asked. Elliot opened his mouth and couldn't remember his own name. The house exhaled and whispered in satisfaction. Balance restored. The moment the house whispered those words. Balance restored. Something deep inside Greystone Hollow shifted. Not the usual groaning of wood or the hungry shudder of walls, but a shift of intent. Like the house had moved from waiting to watching, from wanting to remember to wanting to be remembered. Elliot stood motionless in the foyer, cold air crawling beneath his skin as the realization hit him. This place, this living monument of grief and guilt, had no plans to let him go. Not now, not ever. Not because it needed him, but because he had finally become useful. Jonah stared at him with eyes no longer void, but full, brimming with something worse than malice, understanding. The boy, if he could still be called that, held the journal like scripture. The spine cracked and flaking with dried blood, the pages warping from dampness. But the mirror, the one Elliot had last seen torn from Jonah's chest, had changed. It no longer reflected the present. Instead, it showed other people. Their faces unfamiliar, their eyes vacant, each one whispering silently from within the glass. A man with burn marks across his throat, a teenage girl missing her mouth, a baby curled into itself, eyes wide with endless knowing. Names, that's what they were. The house didn't feed on bodies, it fed on names, memories, identity. And once it had enough, it didn't consume you. It became you. You see now, don't you? Jonah said, not with cruelty but with quiet resignation. She didn't want to hurt you. She just wanted to be remembered. We all do. But this house, it doesn't remember the way you think it does. Elliot took a step forward, his voice barely a rasp. What is this place? Jonah blinked, then tilted the mirror toward him. This house isn't haunted. It's made of hauntings. It's built out of everyone who's ever been forgotten. The air pressed down like a second skin. Elliot tried to look away from the mirror, but his gaze snapped back with a magnetic pull. His face wasn't in it. Instead, he saw a hallway, distant, crumbling, lined with doors. Each door bore a name. Some were scratched out, others burned in, glowing faintly. And at the end of the hallway stood a wall-sized book, bound in something that pulsed and twitched. Jonah turned the journal toward Elliot, revealing the next page. The ink was still wet. It was a contract, not written in law or legalese. Just 3 lines: you were saved. Another was not. Balance demands a name. Give it your name, Jonah said. Then you're free. Elliot's heart slammed in his chest. His name. That's what it wanted. Why mine? He asked, stepping back. Why me? Because she loved you, Jonah said softly. She gave you everything. You were the last thing she said before the fire took her. I didn't choose that, Elliot hissed. No, Jonah nodded. But you carried it. All these years, you carried it. Your fear, your forgetting, your guilt. You fed this place more than anyone. The house groaned again, louder now. Cracks formed in the floor beneath their feet, black tendrils crawling outward like veins, reaching for something unseen. The chandelier above them flickered with a nauseating rhythm. The stairs behind them splintered. Greystone Hollow was closing in, tightening its ribs around its oldest wound. Elliot clutched the journal. His name swam in his head. He remembered how he used to write it in his notebook at school, over and over. How it had looked on forms, in birthday cards, on the corner of his sketchbook. It had been the only thing he truly owned. He took the pen. It felt warm, alive, and as he brought the tip to the page, something inside him screamed. A scream not of fear, but of finality. He hesitated. "If I give you my name," he said, "what happens to me?" Jonah smiled. "Not kindly, not cruelly. You become part of the house, but not a ghost. You become its memory. You become known." Elliot stared down at the blank space on the page. His name hovered in his throat. Then, he dropped the pen. "No," he said, voice shaking. "She didn't give her life so I could become a footnote in this place. She saved me to live. I won't let the house have that." The house screamed. All at once, the walls convulsed, the floor cracked in two. A wave of dark, slithering roots erupted from beneath the boards and shot toward him like striking snakes. Jonah didn't flinch. He only stepped back, letting the house do what it needed. Elliot ran, through a hallway that didn't belong to this house. A memory of a hospital corridor, flickering with blue light. Then through a childhood bedroom, where the walls whispered lullabies in reverse. Then downstairs that changed with every step. Wood to stone, stone to bone, bone to blood-soaked carpet. He ran until the breath tore from his lungs. Until the walls stopped shifting. Until he stood in front of a door that wasn't his. It was blank, no name. Just a brass handle that trembled, as if the door itself was afraid of what waited behind it. Elliot touched the handle. It didn't burn. He opened the door. Inside was a single chair, empty, and on the wall in front of it hundreds, thousands, of names carved into the plaster. Some recent, some ancient, all trembling slightly, as if reacting to his presence. At the bottom of the wall, in fresh blood, was a question, "What do you want to be called?" Elliot looked at the chair, then back at the wall. He stepped inside, and the door shut behind him. Greystone Hollow exhaled, and somewhere in the mirror Jonah held, a new name began to form. Not Elliot, but something else entirely. Something he chose. Because even here, even in a house made of sorrow and screams, a name still had power, and he wasn't ready to give his away. The walls didn't breathe in this room. Unlike the rest of Greystone Hollow, where every surface seemed to twitch with breath, echo with memory, groan with the endless turning of grief, this room was still. Not dead, not cold, just waiting. A room outside of time, where silence didn't press but invited. Elliot stood near the door he had just passed through, his hand still on the knob, his fingers trembling against the brass. He didn't want to sit. He didn't want to stay. But he knew, with a heaviness that sat in the deepest parts of him, that if he left now without answering the question on the wall, the house would rewrite him. It would turn his story into its own. He stepped further inside. The door behind him didn't vanish. It didn't seal itself like all the others had. But it felt farther away than it should be. Like each step he took forward stretched the space between himself and escape. The chair in the middle of the room wasn't remarkable. Wood. No cushions. One of the legs slightly crooked. The kind of thing you wouldn't look at twice in a thrift store. But the moment Elliot sat in it, the air thickened. The silence shifted, not broken, tuned, like the room was listening. Across from him, the wall of names pulsed. They were etched in no order, no pattern. Some names were crooked, some pristine, some scratched in with bare fingernails, others burned into the plaster, letters blackened and scarred. And just beneath them, that question again. The blood hadn't dried. It glistened still. "What do you want to be called?" Elliot stared at it for a long time. He thought of writing his name again, carving it into the wall, just as it had followed him through every hallway, every twisted dream. Elliot Grayson, the boy who'd survived the fire, the man who came back, the one who remembered too late. But as he sat in that chair, surrounded by a silence thick with the weight of every forgotten life, the name felt small. Wrong. It didn't feel like his anymore. He leaned forward. "I want to be called," he whispered, but nothing came. Because there wasn't a new name. There was only a truth. He was not one person. Not anymore. Not after the things he had seen, the memories he had lived, the grief he had inherited. He was not just Elliot. He was the echo of Elizabeth's scream. He was Jonah's question. He was the teeth behind the mirror. The lullaby sung in reverse. The burned hands reaching through ash. He was all of them. And that's when he understood the trick of the house. It didn't steal your name. It offered you another. One that fit better. The house fed on people trying to become someone else. People running from what they'd done. What they'd lost, what they couldn't face. It welcomed those who no longer knew who they were. Because that meant it could decide for them. And Elliot had nearly let it. He stood, legs steady now, and faced the wall. The names shimmered, whispered, beckoned, but he didn't choose a new one. He didn't surrender the old. Instead, he stepped forward and wrote something else. Not with a pen, with his own blood. He pressed his thumb against the plaster until it split, then dragged the crimson smear beneath the names and scrawled 3 words, "I remember, hey-er." The room shook, not violently, not with rage, but like it was surprised. And for the first time since he'd stepped into Greystone Hollow, the house hesitated. The blood brightened, glowing softly. The other names above it began to fade, one by one, dissolving into the wall like mist. Elliot stumbled back, eyes wide, as he realized what was happening. The house wasn't erasing them. It was releasing them, not just the names. The people, the forgotten, the ones trapped in reflections and dreams and floorboards. They were being let go, and the house didn't like it. Far below, something screamed, the kind of sound you feel in your teeth and your spine. A howl not of pain, but fury. Jonah's mirror shattered somewhere in the distance. Doors slammed. The lights dimmed. The walls groaned. And then, the door behind Elliot exploded open, slamming into the wall like a cannon shot. The house surged forward. Dark tendrils, like roots soaked in ash and memory, poured into the room. They clawed across the floor, across the ceiling, reaching for the words he had written, reaching for the part of him that dared remember without permission. But it was too late. The name was given, and not just his. Hers. Elizabeth's name, long silenced in charred wood and forgotten lullabies, had been spoken. Seen, remembered. Not as a monster, not as a ghost, as a mother who burned saving someone she loved. The tendrils recoiled. The room filled with light, not blinding, not pure, just real. Sunlight through dusty windows, warmth across bare skin, the kind of light that makes shadows step back, the kind of light that doesn't destroy, but tells the truth. And then the house began to crack. From the inside, plaster peeled, paint blistered, floorboards split. The silence broke, but not into screams, into voices, dozens, hundreds, calling names, calling memories, calling home. The house didn't collapse all at once. It peeled away, layer by layer, as if it had built itself on lies and now, finally, couldn't bear the truth. And when Elliot stepped out of the room, the hallway was gone. Only sky, only wind, only a slow rain that smelled like ash and honeysuckle, and a voice behind him, familiar, trembling, grateful. "Thank you," he turned. Elizabeth stood there, whole, smiling, not haunting him, just leaving. He didn't say goodbye. He didn't need to. Because she was finally free, and for the first time in his life, so was he. Rain kissed his face like a benediction. Not cold, not violent, just soft, gentle taps that carried the smell of wet wood and new beginnings. Elliot stood where the hallway had been, where the door had vanished, where the room of names had cracked the spine of Greystone Hollow open. The sky above him stretched wide and gray, with no ceiling to cage it, no walls to push against, just air, and silence, and space. His breath came lighter now, though every inhale still trembled, as if his body hadn't quite caught up with the fact that it had survived. Behind him, there was nothing. The house had folded into itself like a dying memory, shrinking, warping, groaning through the slow collapse of walls built on grief. Its rooms were unraveling. Hallways shortened, staircases curved into impossible loops before disappearing entirely. Every window went black, every mirror cracked. It wasn't burning, there were no flames. Just the sound of it letting go, piece by piece, soul by soul. Elliot watched until only the front porch remained. Just the steps, just the doorframe. No house behind it, and yet the frame stayed upright, as if waiting, as if unsure whether it should vanish or rebuild. He turned away. But the air behind him shifted, bent. It was following him, not physically, not with footsteps or walls chasing him down, but in the quiet way shadows linger even when the sun is gone. In the memory of footsteps behind you when you walk alone. In the shape your reflection holds a moment too long after you've turned away. Elliot felt it. The house hadn't died. It had changed. It had released the names, yes, but that didn't mean it had lost the hunger. That kind of hunger, born from abandonment, from love twisted into obsession, didn't die just because the lights went out. It waited. As he walked through the clearing, the world returned in small pieces. Trees, grass, the distant hum of cicadas, the gravel road. It all knitted itself back together, bit by bit, like the land had been sleeping under the house's weight, and now finally had the strength to breathe again. Dagger Hill loomed ahead, not alive, not bustling, but intact. Windows boarded, streets empty, silence hanging from every streetlight like a warning. He passed the town limits without a single soul stopping him. They never had. They'd known about the house, maybe not in detail, maybe not consciously. But towns like this didn't survive by accident. They survived by forgetting what they needed to, by pretending things stayed buried. But the thing about buried things, they tend to dig. 3 days passed. Elliot took a motel room 2 towns over. He kept the lights on at night, kept a mirror covered with a pillowcase. Didn't speak to the man at the front desk, though the man never once looked up from his crossword puzzle, like he'd seen this type of return before. He slept fitfully, dreamed of doors. He woke with someone else's name in his mouth. On the 4th morning, something changed. The rain had stopped. Sunlight split across the parking lot like stained glass. Birds chirped, and someone knocked on his door. 3 soft taps, just like before. His heart skipped. He didn't answer. But the knocking came again. When he looked through the peephole, there was no one there. Only a package, wrapped in brown paper. No return address. No markings at all. He opened the door and stared at it for a long time. When he finally picked it up, the weight told him everything before he even peeled back the paper. The journal, the one he'd left behind, burned, bled on, signed, but it wasn't charred anymore. It was whole, pristine, as if untouched. He opened it slowly. The pages were blank, every one of them clean. Waiting, his name wasn't there, not the one he'd been born with, not the one he'd tried to keep. But at the very last page, something was written in delicate, spidery script, "We remember you." He slammed it shut, but the journal pulsed, not angrily, hopefully, and that's when he understood the final cruelty of Greystone Hollow. You never left it. You just carried it with you. Elliot looked into the motel mirror, now uncovered. His reflection stared back. Same face, same scar on his wrist, same tired eyes. But something shimmered behind the glass. A hallway, familiar, wood-paneled, soft lighting, doors closed, all but one. And in that open room, a crib, empty, waiting. He turned the mirror to the wall and sat down with the journal in his lap. His hands shook. He didn't know what he would write. Not yet. But the house had left the pages empty for a reason, because it hadn't finished telling its story. And now, it was his turn to remember it right. The motel room's lights buzzed with a low, anxious hum. Elliot hadn't moved for hours. The journal lay in his lap like a ticking bomb, heavy and patient, each blank page a held breath. He stared at it, pulse thrumming in his ears, unsure whether the silence in the room was his own, or if the house had found a way to still everything again. There was no reason for the room to feel cold, no storm outside, no draft, but the chill crept in anyway. Not through the window, not through the vents. It came from the mirror. He didn't look at it at first. He didn't need to. He felt the pressure of it. That soft pull at the edge of the eye, that twitch just beneath the skin. The sense that something, someone, was watching from a place that shouldn't be there. He tried to ignore it, tried to pretend it was just residual fear, psychological debris, but the feeling grew. Not louder, not sharper, closer. He turned, and the mirror had changed. It didn't show the room, not his face, not the overhead light, only that hallway. The same hallway he'd seen before. Polished wood floor, faint, flickering light, a line of doors with tarnished brass handles, and at the far end, the nursery. The door was wide open now. He should have looked away. Should have turned the mirror back to the wall, walked out, burned the journal, disappeared again. But something in his chest tightened. A hook, barbed and deep, tugging him toward the glass. Because the crib wasn't empty anymore. Inside it was a doll. Old, moth-eaten, the same one he remembered from his dreams, from the fire, from the charred corners of his childhood. One black button eye, one torn arm, stuffing trailing from the side like smoke, and held to its chest, wrapped in its brittle cotton arms, was the photograph he hadn't known he'd lost. A picture of him, as a baby. He blinked, and the picture was gone. Now the doll held a lock of hair, then a tooth, then he stopped looking. But it was too late. The sound started, soft, rhythmic, like a rocking chair, back and forth, back and forth. The journal in his lap trembled. He flipped it open without meaning to. There, in the center of the blank page, new words were scrawled in a looping hand not his own. He still cries at night. Won't you sing to him? His throat closed. There was no one else in the room, no voice but his, and yet the words echoed, sung, a tune he remembered only in pieces, a melody from a cradle he didn't recall seeing, but that his soul somehow recognized. His lips moved. He didn't try to stop them. The song came out cracked and thin, but it filled the room like incense. The mirror responded. The hallway shifted. The door at the end creaked wider. The light above the crib flickered. And then, the doll turned its head. He recoiled from the mirror so violently the chair tipped backward, slamming him against the carpeted floor. The journal skidded to the base of the bed, flapping open to another page. This one showed a drawing. Pencil. Rushed. Smudged. It was the crib again. The doll, and behind it, standing just beyond the doorway, a tall figure, looming, faceless. No features at all, just a silhouette of ash. Elliot's stomach turned. He scrambled up and snatched the journal, flipping page after page. Every one now filled. Sketches, notes, phrases that spiraled into madness. He's not a child anymore. She made him from grief. You are his lullaby. Don't let him out. He stopped at the last page. It showed the mirror, but from the other side, drawn from within. And there, staring out from the reflection, was Elliot. Eyes closed, lips parted, hands pressed to glass. The caption beneath it read, "He never left." He stumbled to the sink, splashing cold water on his face, heart thrashing in his chest. When he looked up into the bathroom mirror, he wasn't alone. Elizabeth stood behind him, but not as a ghost, not twisted or half-formed. She looked tired, paler, older, but her eyes were the same. "Why did you come back?" she asked. Elliot spun, but the room was empty. Back in the mirror, she still stood there, waiting. "Why do you always come back?" she whispered. He opened his mouth to answer, but his voice wasn't his. The sound that came out was a child's cry, long, empty, needing. He clutched the edges of the sink, gasping. "No," he whispered. "This is over. I finished it. I let you go." The The mirror cracked from the inside, and then, without warning, the lights died. The room plunged into black, but not empty black, not silence. The crib was here. He couldn't see it, but he felt it. The weight of it in the room. The presence, the soft rocking, the pull. He turned, slow breath ragged, and in the corner of the room, right where the mirror had been, something gleamed. A single black button eye, watching. And the house whispered one last thing before the dark swallowed the world again. You can leave the house, Elliot. But the house doesn't leave you. Elliot woke to the sound of breathing, not his own. It filled the room in waves, slow and measured, like someone sleeping inches from his ear. But when he sat up, heart pounding, the motel room was empty. The mirror had shattered during the night, a web of cracks splintering outward from the center like a gunshot. Light spilled in through the blinds, thin and pale, but it didn't warm the room. It felt wrong, off, like it belonged to another place entirely. The crib was gone, so was the doll, but the smell remained, that awful, faint scent of smoke and baby powder, of old cloth and something else. Something wet, metallic, like blood and rust and time. The journal lay beside him, unopened. He didn't remember falling asleep, didn't remember lying down at all. When he picked it up, the pages felt damp, as if the words had been crying through the night. He hesitated, thumb hovering over the edge of the cover. He didn't want to open it again, but he knew he would. It always made sure of that, and when he did, the page had changed again. Only one sentence this time, scrawled in thick black ink, "The crib is not the beginning." It struck him hard, that line. Something about it felt final, like a warning, or a reminder. The house had tricked him. The fire wasn't the root of it all. Neither was Elizabeth, not even Jonah. The crib was just a symptom, a place to bury the blame, but the sickness ran deeper. The motel room began to change. He didn't notice it at first. The shift was too slow. The light flickered, but that could have been the bulb. The wallpaper peeled, but maybe it had always been like that. The hum of the vent deepened into something too regular. Not the static drone of airflow, but a pulse, a breath. Elliot looked up. The mirror was no longer shattered. But he hadn't fixed it. It looked new, pristine, framed in black wood that hadn't been there the night before. No cracks, no dust, and inside it not his reflection, but a corridor, narrow, cramped, wet. A hallway with water stains on the ceiling and wallpaper peeling in long strips. A hallway that shouldn't exist in a single-story motel room. The journal pages flipped themselves, violent, frantic, like fingers turning them from behind. Then the words wrote themselves. The echo room is open. The mirror pulsed. The light bent. And without warning, Elliot was no longer in the motel. He stood at the mouth of that narrow hallway. Same pulsing ceiling. Same waterlogged floor. The door behind him was gone. No more sunlight. Just dim yellow bulbs lining the ceiling like decaying teeth. He walked. Because what else could he do? Each step made a sound that didn't belong to him. The echo didn't match. He lifted his right foot. But the sound came from the left. Sometimes it lagged, sometimes it preceded him, but it was never in sync. The hallway seemed to stretch in both directions, though he knew he was only moving forward. Then the voices began. Whispers at first, but not to him, they were his. Fragments of thoughts he'd never said aloud, guilt he'd swallowed, lies he'd told. She wasn't my mother. I wanted to forget. I ran from the fire. The walls pulsed with the words, absorbing them, feeding. A door appeared on the right. He stopped. It looked like the bedroom door from his childhood home, before Dagger Hill. Before the foster homes. The one that stuck in winter. The one with the little carved moon his mother had glued there to make it less scary. But the moon was upside down now. A smile. Or a warning. He opened it. Inside, a single chair sat beneath a flickering light. On it, a recorder. The kind with actual cassette tapes. Static hissed from its speaker. He pressed play. A lullaby, distorted, backwards, slow. Then, a voice. His. as a child, sobbing, "Don't leave me." Click, silence. Then a second voice. Elizabeth, not soothing, not angry, just lost. He won't sleep unless someone stays. He remembers too much. The tape clicked again. Stopped. The hallway returned. Elliot stumbled out of the room, bile rising in his throat. He understood now. The echo room didn't just reflect memories. It held them. Every person the house had ever touched, every fear, every last word unsaid, lived in these halls. Trapped, rotating through broken loops. He wasn't being haunted. He was haunting himself. Another door opened. This one without prompting. Inside, a cradle, no child. Just a name carved into the wood, over and over. A-L-O-T, L-I-O-T, L-I-O-T. Each spelling slightly different. Some with 2 L's. Some mirrored. Some backward. As if the house had been practicing. Trying to write it right. Trying to hold on. Trying not to forget. He turned away. Ran now. The hallway collapsed behind him, folding into smoke. The light burst above. The echoes screamed, but he didn't stop, until he hit the wall. A mirror. Another one. But this time, it didn't show anything. Just darkness, except for 2 hands. Pressing from the other side. Tiny. Childlike. And the words etched into the glass say my name. Or I'll take yours. Elliot raised the journal. The pen was in his pocket. He didn't remember putting it there. But the page opened, and it waited, still blank. The house didn't want his body. It wanted his memory. It wanted him to choose to stay, to forget himself, to name it, and let his own name rot away in the walls. The pen shook in his fingers. He stepped back from the glass. The hands on the other side started to bang now, rhythmic, desperate. Elliot clenched his jaw, and with shaking fingers he wrote, not a name, not a memory, just one word, no. The hallway screamed, and the mirror shattered from the inside. Again, the shards didn't fall. They hung in the air like they were still trying to reflect something. Caught mid-collapse, suspended in a moment that had lost its gravity. Each broken fragment held a sliver of light, a sliver of memory, and a different version of Elliot's face. Some younger, some older, some staring back with expressions he didn't recognize. Some were screaming. Some were smiling. And one was watching him with no eyes at all. The hallway behind him groaned as if wounded, walls bending inward like the house itself was trying to recoil. He felt it in the floor, a tremor, a hesitation. The decision he made not to speak a name, not to surrender himself to the echo, had done something to the structure. The house didn't expect refusal. It had always relied on guilt, on memory, on people trying to make sense of what they lost, on the promise that somewhere in the past they could still fix it. But Elliot wasn't here to fix anything anymore. He was here to end it. The journal, still in his hand, began to warm again. He looked down. Another line had written itself in dark red ink, almost pressed into the paper, as if gouged by something with claws instead of a pen. You broke the mirror, but the reflection still remembers you. The lights snapped off. Darkness dropped like a curtain. Not quiet darkness, either. This darkness buzzed. It crackled with electricity, with pressure, with the impossible weight of being watched by something with no form, no eyes, no face, but with the power to see. And in that black, a sound began. Drip, 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 like water, but not water. It was thicker, slower. Elliot turned in place, heart battering his ribs. The sound echoed from everywhere and nowhere. Then it grew louder. Drip, drag, drip. Something wet was moving in the hallway. The shards still hung in the air, frozen, refracting nothing. Then the air behind them ripped. It didn't open. It tore. A seam pulled itself across the hallway, stretching wide like a mouth in the world itself. From inside, fingers curled around the edge. Not bone, not flesh, not wood. They were glass. Smooth, jagged. They shimmered like mirror shards given form and movement. And then it stepped through. It wasn't a person. Not really, but it wore his shape. A perfect reflection of Elliot, except for the face. No mouth. No eyes. Just mirrored skin where features should have been. A faceless version of himself made entirely from reflection. Its movements were wrong, stiff, twitchy, like a glitch in reality. And it began walking toward him. Slowly, patiently, hands dragging against the wall, leaving streaks of silver liquid in their wake, as if the hallway itself was bleeding memory. Elliot stepped back. The journal pulsed again, forcing his hand to open it. The mirror wants your story. Let it take the version you don't need. What version? He whispered aloud. What does that even mean? The doppelganger stopped, as if it had heard him. Then, impossibly, it tilted its head, and Elliot saw his own expression from moments ago. Fear, panic, echoed back in the mirrored mask, except this version smiled, not with a mouth, but with body language, with tilt, with presence. It liked this. It was remembering how he moved, how he thought, and it wanted to take over. Elliot spun and ran. The hallway stretched, pulsed, twisted with every step. He didn't know where he was going anymore. There was no destination, no exit. But forward was better than waiting. Behind him, he heard the click of glass feet on tile, not footsteps. Taps, like fingernails on a mirror, faster now. Louder, and then another door, plain. Wood, just ahead. Elliot shoved it open without thinking and slammed it shut behind him. Inside was another room. Not one he remembered. Not one he recognized. It was blank, white walls, white floor, no furniture, no shadows, just him. And one thing at the center, a mirror, whole, oval, standing on a single rusted leg. But unlike the other mirrors, this one showed nothing. No reflection, not even light, just a gray void in the glass. And beneath it, carved into the floor, choose who stays. Elliot backed away. No, he whispered. He didn't need to read the journal to understand now. The house was trying again, offering a bargain. A loophole. Let the reflection take his place. Let it wear his name. Let it carry the burden. And he could walk away. But the reflection had already followed him into the room. It stepped through the wall like it was water. And now it was close, too close. The glass of its skin trembled. It raised a hand to the mirror, pointed, then reached toward Elliot, and he understood. This wasn't about guilt anymore. It was about identity. The house couldn't force him to stay, but it could give him a way out. Let the thing in the mirror take his story. Let it live the life he no longer wanted. He stepped forward, staring into the blank glass. The figure behind him moved with him, shadowing his steps. At the edge of the mirror, Elliot paused, then reached into his pocket. The pen, still there. He pulled it out and knelt beside the carving on the floor. Right under choose who stays, he wrote 3 more words. Neither of us. And drove the pen into the mirror. This time, it didn't crack. It shattered, silently, completely. The glass imploded inward, sucking light, space, sound. The reflection screamed, but not with a voice. With shards. Its body broke, splintered, collapsed into dust made of memories, of glances, of unsaid things. It vanished into the mirror as it collapsed into itself. And Elliot was alone, no glass, no room, just falling. Falling, through pages, through time, through every forgotten name, greystone, hollow, ever buried. And in the dark below, something waited with open arms, not to catch him, to claim him. Unless he remembered first, there was no impact. No slam. No final thud to mark the moment Elliot hit bottom. He simply stopped falling, like the descent had ended, not because he landed, but because the house had decided he'd gone deep enough. It was pitch black, but not silent. The kind of black that hummed. Not with electricity, not even with breath, with remembering. It was warm here, stifling almost, damp. The air clung to his skin like wet wool, thick with mildew, decay, and something sweet. The sweetness was wrong. Rotten sweet, like the syrupy scent of old fruit left out too long. And beneath it all, deeper than smell, deeper than skin, was the feeling that he was not alone. Elliot sat up. He was in a crawlspace. He recognized the shape of it from childhood games. The tightness of it, the way the ceiling seemed to lower the longer you stayed. The walls were made of old timber beams, dark with rot and slick in places. Roots jutted through the ceiling and floor like veins. Some of them pulsed when he moved. He stood, but the space didn't allow it, so he crawled. Forward. Always forward. The journal was still in his hand, damp but intact. The pen gone. Taken. Swallowed. Like the rest of him might be, if he made the wrong turn. There were sounds now, scuttling to his left. A laugh to his right, soft and cracked, like the voice of a child who hadn't spoken in decades. Something brushed his ankle. Cold fingers. A string. He didn't stop to check, and then came the voices. Not whispers, not echoes. Memories. Played aloud. Louder the farther he crawled. Don't leave me in here. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to shut the door. I didn't want to forget. I was only a child. I never asked to be saved. I never asked to be born. Each voice belonged to someone he didn't know, but each one sounded just like him. The crawl space opened into a hollow chamber beneath the house, deeper than any foundation had reason to go. It was circular, dome-like, lit by a soft orange glow from beneath the floorboards, as if the room itself were floating on fire. At the center stood a massive object. At first, he thought it was a sculpture. Then he realized it was a heap, a pile of toys, dolls, cribs, shoes, locks of hair, blankets, stuffed animals with button eyes, little clothes brittle with age, childhood, all of it left behind, burned, forgotten, abandoned. It pulsed as if alive, breathing. And in the silence that followed, the journal opened itself. The page turned, and the writing appeared in long, jagged strokes. This is what happens when you don't say their names. Something moved in the pile. Burrowed. Elliot stepped back, but the floor behind him cracked, and with it came the sharp sound of a rattle. A baby's rattle. It rolled toward him out of the dark, stopping at his knee like it had been placed, and not dropped. He picked it up, and it was wet. Something in the heap shifted again, then rose. A figure, crawling free. Not a child, not an adult. Somewhere in between. Its limbs were long, thin, stretched unnaturally like rubber pulled too far. Its head tilted as it looked at him, face covered by a mask made entirely of tiny broken mirrors. Each one showed a different memory. One showed his face covered in ash. Another showed Elizabeth screaming. A third, Jonah standing in the fire, untouched. The figure opened its mouth. 100 voices spoke at once. All versions of Elliot. You chose to forget, and in forgetting, you fed us. He stepped back, but the thing kept crawling forward, dragging its two long arms across the floor, each movement scraping up more of the floorboards, revealing the light beneath. Flames. The fire was still burning, always burning, feeding on the things people chose not to remember. You buried her, the voices hissed. You made her a story instead of a person. You let the house become her name. You let the fire become her face. Elliot raised the journal like a shield. The voices stopped, and the thing screamed. Every shard of glass on its face shimmered, cracked, and reflected the fire, the house, the woman, the boy, and him, all tangled together. He didn't know what to do. Then, he flipped to the first page. The first one, the one from weeks ago. Before Greystone Hollow opened its mouth, there it was, his name, scrawled in ink. Elliot Grayson. He stared at it, then tore the page out. The journal screamed, not aloud, in his head. A pressure so immense it made his teeth ache. But he didn't stop. He tore the second page, then the third. He ripped out every entry, every twisted drawing, every whispered warning, until only the final page remained, blank, waiting. And he wrote, not a memory, not a confession, just a name, one he'd never dared to write before. Elizabeth Hollow. The fire beneath the floor raged. The mirror-faced creature shrieked and shattered into dust. The pile of toys exploded outward in a whirlwind of ash, and the room filled with a wind that had never existed here before. Release. The journal closed itself. Hard. And when Elliot opened his eyes, he was lying on the ground, in front of a burned-down house, charred beams, ash drifting like snow. Greystone Hollow was gone. No whispers, no light, no doors. Only one thing remained, buried beneath the rubble, a single crib. empty, and a single name carved into the wood for the first time. Clear, unburned. Elizabeth. The ashes didn't stir, not in the breeze, not underfoot, not even when Elliot knelt beside the crib and touched the soot-covered wood. Everything felt frozen. The silence wasn't threatening anymore. It was hollow, stripped bare, like something ancient had finally stopped breathing. The house was truly gone. Not dormant, not hiding. Gone in a way that felt permanent, as if it had finally accepted what it had refused to face for over a century. The fire hadn't just ended its walls. It had ended its purpose. The hunger had starved. The echoes had faded. But something lingered. Not malevolent, not spectral, something unfinished. Elliot sat beside the crib, too exhausted to move, legs folded on the burnt floor. Charcoal clung to his palms, smeared his jeans, and painted his lungs with the dry memory of flame. His throat burned, but not from smoke. From knowing. The kind of knowing that came only after something unspeakable has finally been spoken. He didn't cry. There were no tears left. He'd left them in the journal. In the echo room. In the mirror that wore his face and tried to take his name. The wind picked up slightly, scattering fragments of what once was a ceiling. Dust and ash danced in the air like snow, like embers caught in rewind. Then he heard her. Not a scream. Not a whisper, just a breath. Thank you. It came from nowhere. And everywhere soft, full, real. Elizabeth's voice. It didn't echo. It didn't linger. It didn't need to. Because she wasn't trapped anymore. She had finally left the house. And Elliot knew then. This was never about purging a haunted building, or fighting off some evil, or solving a mystery to win freedom. This had always been about grief. Not loud grief, not the kind that bursts out and floods over. The quiet kind. The kind that waits beneath skin for years. The kind that settles into bones. The kind that builds houses. Elizabeth never wanted revenge. She wanted someone to say her name and mean it. Not like a curse, not like a warning, but like she mattered. Not as a legend, not as a horror. As a person, someone who loved, who tried, who burned, and someone who was forgotten anyway. Elliot reached out and traced the letters carved into the crib with his finger. Elizabeth. There was no last name, no date. Just that, a name. Simple, beautiful, enough. He stood after a while, legs trembling, muscles tight from fear and crawling in silence. As he did, something in the ground shifted. A small box, half buried beneath blackened debris, revealed itself. He knelt and pulled it free. It was metal, rusted, dent in the corner. He opened it slowly. Inside, old photographs. One of a woman in a white dress, smiling faintly beside a massive oak tree. One of a baby, blurred, mid-laugh. One of the house, before it was Greystone Hollow. When it was just home. And on the back of the last photograph, in handwriting he'd never seen until now, a message: "He has your smile. Please forgive me for saving him." Elliot clutched the photo. The air knocked from his lungs. He didn't know whose hand wrote those words. Elizabeth's. The woman who ran from the fire. The one who placed him on the porch of another house in another town. It didn't matter. Forgiveness wasn't what the house had needed. It had needed remembrance. And now, as he stepped away from the ruins, as the wind carried ash into the blue sky above, Elliot knew the house wasn't following him anymore. It wasn't waiting for him to return. It had finally let go. But there was one more thing he had to do. One more door that needed to open. Not in a hallway of impossible mirrors. Not in a nursery filled with echoes. In the real world. The one he'd spent his life trying not to think about. The grave was unmarked, at the edge of a forgotten cemetery near the woods outside Dagger Hill. Covered in moss. A stone with no name, no dates, no words. Elliot stood in front of it, the journal in one hand, the photo box in the other. He reached into his coat and pulled out a pocket knife. Opened it. Kneeling, he scraped away at the moss on the stone until the gray was visible again. Then, with slow care, he used the blade to carve into the surface. The same name, Elizabeth, nothing more. He placed the photo box at the base of the stone, and without speaking, without ceremony, without anything but the truth in his chest, he set the journal on top of it and walked away. He never looked back. Because you only look back when something might still be behind you. And for the first time in his life, nothing was. Elliot left the cemetery with dirt under his nails and silence in his chest. The kind of silence that doesn't ache. The kind that settles. That stays. He didn't feel free, not in the way people talk about. Like a weight had been lifted, or like he could suddenly breathe again. No. It was more like realizing the weight had always been part of him, and finally learning how to carry it without letting it break him. The wind pushed gently through the trees as he walked, rustling leaves like a lullaby no one remembered how to sing. Dagger Hill was still several miles away, but it no longer felt like a place that could hurt him. The town wasn't the same. It never had been, really. The diner that used to sit on the corner of Main and Ash was gone, burned out long before he ever stepped foot in the house. The church still stood, its windows clouded, its bell tower empty, and the people, well, they kept their distance. The way people in quiet towns always do when they sense something bigger has passed through their streets. They didn't ask where he'd been. They didn't ask what had happened. No one even mentioned the fire. Maybe they hadn't seen it. Maybe the house hadn't burned in their world the way it had in his. But when he passed the general store, an old woman sitting on the bench outside looked up and said softly, "It's over, then." Elliot paused. He hadn't spoken to her before. Didn't know her name. But her eyes told him she knew exactly what he had gone into. He nodded once. She didn't smile. She just closed her eyes and leaned back against the bench like she, too, had been holding her breath. No one else spoke to him the rest of the day. The motel room was just as he'd left it. The mirror remained cracked, but the cracks had stopped spreading. The hum in the walls had gone still. The journal was gone, left at the grave where it belonged. But in its place, resting on the pillow, was something else. A single black button. He stared at it for a long time. It wasn't threatening. It wasn't warm or cold or magical. Just a button. But he recognized it. The missing eye from the doll in the crib. The one that had watched him from behind the glass. The one that had remembered him when no one else had. He picked it up. It was heavier than it should have been. Not in weight. In memory. He didn't keep it. He walked outside and flicked it into the woods. Far from the town, far from the grave, far from anything that could pick it up again. And as it disappeared into the underbrush, he swore he heard a sound, not a whisper, not a scream, a breath, a sigh, like something finally exhaling after holding on too long. Days passed. Then weeks. Elliot didn't go back to the city. He didn't know if he could. Every building had too many doors. Every hallway had shadows shaped like mirrors. Instead, he stayed on the road, moving from place to place, never far from the edges of towns that time had forgotten. Small places, quiet places, places where grief had soaked into the soil so long ago it no longer cried out. And in every town, he asked one question. Just one. He asked if there were any houses around that people didn't talk about. Old places, homes left empty, porches no one walked past, front doors that refused to stay shut. He didn't always get an answer. Sometimes people just stared at him. Sometimes they smiled, tight-lipped and quiet, and walked away. But sometimes they told him, and when they did he went. Not to hunt, not to burn, to listen, to remember. He didn't know what made certain houses go hollow, what turned grief into wood and whispers. But he knew the signs now. The heat in the attic that shouldn't be there, the smell of old lavender and smoke, the mirrors that reflected rooms that no longer existed, and most of all, the names, forgotten, buried, erased. He wrote them down, each one, carved them into new journals, spoke them aloud to the empty air, and when he could, he gave them graves. Stones, something real. He never brought attention to it. Never told the people who lived nearby what he was doing. He just left something behind. A photo, a name, a button, a breath, and each time, the air in the house changed. Just a little, just enough. He was no longer running from Greystone Hollow. He was carrying it, not as a curse, but as a promise, that no one else would be forgotten, not if he could help it. And one night, years from that first fire, as he stood in the attic of a crumbling farmhouse near a forgotten hill, Elliot opened his latest journal, saw a name appear on the page in a hand not his own, and smiled. Because this time, the house hadn't whispered for help. It had said something else. Something simple. Something soft. Thank you for knocking. He never expected to find her. Not in the way she appeared. Not in the kind of house that didn't creak or groan or whisper when the wind passed through. This one was quiet. Clean. Almost proud of how well it had hidden the rot underneath. Elliot stood in the hallway, staring at the floral wallpaper stretched across the walls like skin. Bright and cheerful in a way that felt forced, like someone had tried too hard to pretend everything inside had been healed. But he knew the truth. The quietest houses were always the most dangerous. They didn't beg for help. They waited. This one had been waiting a long time. It was the Carson house on the edge of Hollow Pine, one of those towns where the past still clung to the sidewalks. People there didn't believe in ghosts, but they respected them. The woman at the diner told him in passing, "There's a girl in that house. She never leaves, doesn't cry, doesn't scream, just watches." Elliot had smiled politely, but his hands had clenched beneath the table, because the quiet ones, the ones who just watched, were the ones who had been ignored the longest. He arrived just after dusk, no key, no need. The door had been left unlocked, and not by accident. Someone wanted him to step inside. The first thing he noticed was the air. Not stale. Still. Too still. No hum from the fridge. No ticking from a clock. No rattle of pipes. The kind of stillness that made your bones want to whisper, just to break it. The wallpaper followed him. All through the front hallway. Past the parlor. Into the sitting room. Same yellow flowers curling over delicate vines stretched from corner to corner. There were no family pictures, no mirrors, no signs of life at all, until he found the girl's room. The door had a heart carved into the center, faded pink paint. The name Lucy scrawled in a child's handwriting beneath it, scratched shallow into the wood with something sharp. Elliot didn't knock. He opened the door slowly. Inside, the room was perfect, not pristine, preserved, as if someone had stopped time the moment she vanished. A tea set still sat on the little table near the window, 2 chairs placed for a guest that never arrived. Dolls lined the wall shelves. One was missing an arm. Another had a mouth stitched shut. A mobile of stars hung above the crib in the corner, unmoving despite the open window. And the wallpaper, it was different here. Same pattern, same flowers. But now, in the right light, he could see it breathing. He approached the wall, each step feeling heavier, like the floor was trying to push him back. And then he saw it. A small indentation in the wallpaper, oval, shaped. At first, he thought it was a water stain. Then he looked closer, pressed his hand to it. It was warm. The shape beneath pulsed gently, like a heartbeat. He stepped back, and the wallpaper blinked. A single eye pressed behind the floral pattern, wide and watching. He staggered, heart hammering. The journal in his coat burned cold against his ribs. He pulled it free, flipping to a blank page. And there it was. Already written, she saw what she shouldn't have. The eye blinked again, and the wallpaper began to peel. Not slowly. Not like age or time. It peeled itself back, ripping from the corners, tearing in strips, unfolding like skin, and behind it, behind the wall, was not plaster or wood. It was a room, a second room, hidden inside the first, smaller, tighter, papered in old newspaper and pages from children's books, and in the center, a chair. And in the chair, Lucy. She didn't move, didn't breathe. Her hair hung long and tangled, falling over a nightgown too small for her now. She looked 10, maybe 12. Her face was pale but untouched by time, as if the house had frozen her in place, not in death, not in life, in between. Her eyes were open. She was looking right at him, and he knew, immediately, that she'd never left this room, never escaped the day they sealed her in. She had been wallpapered over like a mistake no one wanted to admit, buried alive in memory, in fabric, in fear. The journal pulsed again. Another line appeared. They said she talked to shadows. He stepped into the hidden room, the air tighter, thick with dust and sorrow. Lucy's gaze followed him. She didn't speak, but he felt the words form in the room around him. "Are you like them?" "No," Elliot said aloud, voice shaking. "I'm here to see you." The tiniest smile touched her lips, and then the shadows moved. From the corners of the hidden room, they slid forward, shapes made from absence. No eyes, no mouths, just suggestion. They reached toward her, curling like smoke, and Lucy turned her head for the first time. "No more," she said, a whisper. But it cracked the floor. The walls around the secret chamber splintered, old boards groaning like a sigh after years of silence. Elliot grabbed her hand, surprised to find it warm, real alive, and he pulled. The room collapsed behind them as they stepped out. The wallpaper shrieked, the shadows clawed at the air. But it was too late. Lucy had been seen, remembered. And in the middle of the floor where the hidden room had been, the boards burst open, revealing a box. He opened it. Inside, one doll, its mouth no longer sewn shut. And a note, handwritten, yellow with age. "She talked to them, so we didn't have to. Forgive her." Elliot turned to Lucy. But she was gone. No door opened. No window shifted. She had left the way ghosts do when they're no longer ghosts. And the house had stopped watching. Elliot didn't talk about Lucy afterward. Not to the people in Hollow Pine. Not even to himself. Some stories weren't meant for retelling. Some endings were better left without punctuation. But the house stayed with him. The way they all did, embedded under his skin like splinters too deep to pull. He kept a page for her in his new journal. Not a detailed account. Just her name and a small, rough sketch of a girl peeking through wallpaper. Below it, one line she looked back. The next house didn't wait long. He found it by accident on a drive through a fog, heavy stretch of back road where the map turned gray and the signs pointed nowhere. The trees leaned close, their branches interlocking like fingers, and for a long time, it felt like the world had narrowed down to that one road. Then the fog broke and he saw it. No mailbox, no path, just a house in the clearing, bone, white, 2 stories, windows like black holes. He stopped the car. Didn't question it. Some places didn't need introduction. He could feel it through the air, humming low and steady. Not in his ears, but in his teeth. The kind of vibration that made your fillings ache. This house didn't wait for grief to wander in. It called to it. It pulled. The grass crunched under his boots as he approached, not from frost, but from something else. Something wrong. Each blade was brittle, as if the soil had long since forgotten how to feed anything. The porch steps sagged under his weight, but didn't groan. Even rot was quiet here. Inside, the smell hit him. Not mold, not decay. Dust. Thick, cloying, ancient. The kind of dust that doesn't settle on things, it grows on them. The foyer was small, with a staircase that led nowhere. Literally, it rose 10 steps and ended in a blank wall. No hallway, no door, just a dead end. But as he stared, he realized something worse. There had been a hallway. Once. The wall didn't belong. It had been built later, crudely, plaster slapped over old frame, to seal something off. The banister still curved toward it, leading to nowhere. He opened the journal. Blank. Then, slowly, words blood into the page. She lived between the seconds. Elliot frowned. That wasn't the house talking. That felt different. He closed the book and walked deeper into the house. The layout didn't make sense. The rooms were misaligned. Doors led to walls. Hallways looped back into themselves. It was like walking through a blueprint drawn by someone who had never seen a real building. There were no light switches, no vents, just windows painted shut, and wallpaper that shifted ever so slightly when he turned his back. In the main room, he found the chair. It sat in the center of a perfect circle on the floor, dustless, pristine, like time had refused to touch that one spot. A single photograph rested on the seat. A girl in a white dress. Motion blur behind her, as if she had moved just as the shutter clicked. Her face wasn't quite visible, too soft, too smeared. But her posture was clear, arms raised, mouth open, hands reaching toward something outside the frame. On the back, someone had written she slipped through when we weren't looking. He pocketed the photo, then looked up. The wallpaper on the far wall bulged. Not like with Lucy, not that slow, wet breathing. This was different. This was ticking. Inhale, exhale, timed. Not natural. He approached cautiously. The bulge retracted, vanished. The wall was flat until he turned away. Then he felt it again. Like the house was trying to match his heartbeat. He turned suddenly, and this time saw the outline. A door, flush with the wallpaper. No knob, just a faint seam barely there. He pressed his hand to it. Warm, beating, and beneath it, a sound. Not crying, not footsteps. Laughter, soft, childlike. Then a voice, far away but close enough to touch his spine. Do you remember my name? Elliot's blood chilled. He didn't, not yet, but the house wanted him to. The journal flew open in his hands. A page turned itself. A single phrase written in a loop. She was never born. She was never born. She was never born. Again and again. He pressed his palm harder into the wall. The outline flared briefly. Then, the door opened. Just like that. No groan, no fanfare. Just a room, tiny, almost a closet inside. Toys, dolls, stacked neatly, clean. And in the center, her. She sat cross-legged on the floor, hair dark and thick, dress wrinkled but new looking. She looked no older than 7. No dust on her. No bruises. No chains. Just eyes far too deep for her age. Eyes that watched. As if she'd been staring through the wall this whole time, waiting for someone to open the wrong memory. You found me, she said, voice flat. But you won't remember me when you leave. Elliot stepped into the room. The walls shifted behind him. Closed. She didn't move. Who are you? I was the girl they never named, she said. The one they kept behind the wallpaper. Not because I was dangerous. Because I was wrong. His throat tightened. Lucy. She shook her head. No. Lucy was brave. Lucy screamed. I didn't. I just watched. That made them afraid. Elliot lowered the journal. What's your name? She smiled. I don't have one anymore. The journal opened itself again. A blank page. Then the words write her name, or forget she was ever real. Elliot stared at her. She blinked. Waited. Hands folded in her lap like a child in school. He reached for the pen. Do you want to be remembered? Her smile faded, and for the first time, her voice cracked yes. He pressed the pen to the page, hesitated, then wrote the first name that came to him, Clara. The room sighed, literally exhaled. The walls pulled back, the air warmed, and Clara, she stood, not ghost-like, not vanishing, just real, present, seen. She hugged him, brief, soft, small, and then stepped past him through the doorway. Gone, not dissolved. Gone, and the room, it filled with light, just for a second, and then collapsed into dust. When Elliot opened the journal later that night, the page where he'd written Clara was gone. But a new one had appeared in its place. The house won't remember, but I will. The road didn't exist on any map. Elliot had checked 3 times. No listing in county archives, and no satellite view from above. And yet, there it was. A winding dirt path splitting from the highway like a crack in old porcelain, veering into a dense line of trees that shouldn't have been there. The kind of trees that grew too tightly together, limbs thick with moss, roots gnarled like knuckles clutching secrets. Even the GPS refused to speak. The screen went gray. No signal. No name, just a red dot blinking in place. He didn't turn back. The path narrowed the farther he drove, until the trees formed a tunnel overhead and the sunlight thinned into strips. Something unnatural stirred in the quiet, an emptiness deeper than silence, as if even the wind held its breath here. And then, through the gap in the woods, he saw it. The house, 3 stories tall, iron railings on the upper balconies, rusted but intact. A central spire like a needle threaded through the sky. It looked almost regal, almost proud. But the windows told another story. All of them were painted over, not boarded, not shattered, painted, thick black strokes covering every pane. Every entrance sealed like someone had gone to great lengths to blind it from the inside. Elliot parked the car and stepped out slowly, the boots crunching gravel. The air smelled like ash and iron. The closer he got, the more the house seemed to pull inward, as if the structure were collapsing not physically, but emotionally, imploding under the weight of something too vast to name. He stood on the porch, hand hovering over the knob, and froze, because the moment he touched the door, a sound echoed from inside. Ticking, not mechanical, not steady. It sounded like teeth, chattering, gnashing. He opened the door. Inside, the house was hollow, not abandoned, hollow. The walls were bare, not a scrap of furniture, no paintings, no photos. Just empty rooms that all felt like they had just been emptied. The floors bore tracks of movement, drag marks, footsteps, scratches in the wood where something had clawed its way forward or been pulled unwillingly. And at the center of the foyer, nailed to the floor, was a map. Old, yellowed, edges curled. A layout of the house itself, room by room, hallway by hallway. Someone had drawn red circles on it. Notations in hurried handwriting: don't trust the mirrors. Door doesn't open. Don't try. 3rd floor only appears at night. But what drew Elliot's attention most was the room at the far end of the house, circled 3 times in black. Locked room, never entered. Leave it. Naturally, he folded the map and slid it into his journal, and then went looking for that room. He moved carefully, eyes trained on every surface. Some rooms shifted when he stepped inside. Floorboards rearranged, walls flexed and relaxed like lungs. The house wasn't just alive, it was aware. In one hallway, the ceiling dropped 2 feet behind him as he passed, sealing the path. In another, the wallpaper rippled like it was underwater, faces forming in the patterns before fading again. But none of it stopped him. He passed a room filled with chairs that faced the corner. None turned when he entered, but when he left, he heard them scrape across the floor. He crossed a gallery of mirrors, all shattered, except one. That one reflected not his face but his back. In it, something stood behind him, tall, pale, hands clasped over its mouth. He didn't look back. The journal in his coat burned. When he finally reached the door, it was unremarkable. Wooden, no markings. A single lock, simple, rusted. But as he reached for it, the journal opened in his hands. New words inked themselves into the page. Some doors are locked for your sake. Not theirs. He paused, waited, and then opened the door anyway. Inside dark, and yet not. The light wasn't natural. It came from the walls themselves, which pulsed with a faint blue glow, like veins beneath skin. The room was round. At the center, a chair, and sitting in it was Elliot, older, paler, eyes hollowed by time and memory. He didn't move when Elliot entered, didn't blink, just stared, as if he'd been waiting an eternity for this moment. Elliot approached, cautious, heart hammering. "Who are you?" The older version smiled, soft, almost kind. "I'm who you'll be if you stay." Elliot frowned. "Stay? In the rooms, in the names, in the silence. You think you're helping. You think you're fixing what was broken. But the house always feeds. And every time you open a door, every time you say a name, you leave part of yourself behind." The room trembled. The walls beat faster, like a second heart. "Why show me this now?" Elliot asked. "Because you're getting close," his older self replied. "To the one you missed. The one you don't want to find." And before Elliot could speak again, the older version stood, stepped forward, and merged into him. It wasn't painful. It was worse. It felt true. Suddenly, Elliot remembered rooms he hadn't entered, names he hadn't said aloud, faces he'd passed in dreams but never stopped to acknowledge. The one under the stairs, the one in the attic window, the one in the crib who never cried. He stumbled out of the room, gasping, the door swinging shut behind him, but the journal didn't close. It showed a new page, just one word, written in a child's hand. Why? And for the first time since Greystone Hollow burned, Elliot didn't have an answer. Elliot left the locked room, but something from it stayed inside him. It wasn't just the memory of the older version of himself, pale, resigned, half sunk into a chair that didn't exist before he opened the door. It was the feeling that he'd just stepped off a cliff and hadn't hit the ground yet. The house wasn't satisfied. It hadn't been trying to stop him at all. It had been leading him, testing him. And now, he'd passed some threshold he didn't understand. The hallways stretched longer. The lights flickered without bulbs. The walls pulsed with a heartbeat that no longer matched his own. He wandered back into what must have once been a nursery. The walls were stripped bare, except for faint outlines where picture frames had once hung. The ceiling fan turned slowly despite the still air. A crib stood against the far wall, old, painted white, flaking at the edges. Too pristine to have survived the house's hunger by accident. It hadn't been placed there recently. But it hadn't aged like the rest of the house. It had been preserved. Elliot stepped toward it. The floor creaked once beneath his foot, then fell utterly silent. No echoes. No dust shifting. Just the low, steady sound of something breathing beneath the floorboards. Not wind. Not plumbing. Breath. Slow. Rhythmic. Deep. He reached the crib, heart pounding, and looked inside, empty. Except for a single toy. A stuffed rabbit, its fur matted in gray, both eyes missing. One ear torn in half. The tag on its neck was scorched, but still legible. It said, "I remember everything." Elliot reached in and picked it up. It was cold. Heavy. Stuffing inside turned dense, like it had absorbed something more than age, something like sorrow. Something like memory. The floor beneath the crib shifted. Not a crack, not a tremble. A thud, soft but definite, like someone knocking, from below. The journal flared open in his coat. Words scrawled violently across a page before he could even look. DONOTOPNHFLOR. He looked down. There was no hatch, no trapdoor. But the boards were loose, slightly uneven. A perfect square of warp planks that could be pried up if someone really wanted to. And Elliot really wanted to, even as his hands trembled. Even as the rabbit seemed to warm in his grasp, like it didn't want to go down there. He set the toy aside. Kneeling, he pulled at the edge of the floorboard. It came loose with a quiet groan, lifting like a lid. Beneath it, darkness, but not empty. A ladder led down into it, rotted but stable. He hesitated, but he'd come too far to stop. He climbed down. Each rung was slick with condensation, and as he descended, the air thickened, like syrup. Hard to breathe, hard to think. It wasn't just darkness, it was absence. A place untouched by time, or light, or forgiveness. When his feet touched the floor, he realized the room wasn't a basement. It was a well, a dry one, circular. Stone walls curved inward, impossible to climb without the ladder. The space smelled of milk gone sour and singed fabric. And there, in the center, sat a crib. Another one, identical to the one above. But this one wasn't empty. There was a shape in it, wrapped in thin cloth, stiff with time, a bundle, no movement. Elliot stepped closer, and then it sat up. The bundle sat up, and from beneath the cloth, a face emerged. Not a baby, a girl. Pale skin stretched too thin, eyes wide, mouth closed, hands clutching the sides of the crib with knuckles like bone. Her lips moved. No sound, just shapes. Elliot leaned closer, breath shallow. Her lips formed one word: stop. He blinked. She was gone. The crib was empty again, but behind him, a sound, like limbs unfolding, like nails dragging. He turned. And in the far corner of the well something stood. No face, no voice. Just the outline of a child, burned black, eyes hollow, chest rising slowly. One hand held a rattle, the other reached for him. Elliot backed away, hand trembling as he pulled the journal free. The pages flipped violently, as if wind tore through the book, though the air below was still. Then it landed on a page. One sentence scrawled in blood-dark ink: "You gave her a name, but not a resting place." Elliot dropped the journal. He finally understood. Elizabeth, Lucy, Clara. They weren't the first. They weren't even the beginning. They were symptoms. This was origin. The child beneath the house. The first one buried and forgotten. The first one left without a name. And until she was seen, none of them could leave. The girl in the crib whispered again, no sound. But Elliot didn't need to hear it. He could read her lips. "Name me." His voice cracked. "I don't know it." The rattle dropped. The girl stepped forward. Closer. Her hands opened, reaching, but not to harm. To receive. To be given something. And Elliot said the only name that came to him: Anna. The room exploded in light, blinding, white, purging. He screamed. The air sucked from his lungs. And then stillness. When he opened his eyes, he was lying on the nursery floor. The rabbit was gone. The crib was gone. No hatch. No ladder. No thudding beneath the floorboards. Just a folded note beside him, handwritten on the back of the map. "Thank you for hearing me. I don't have to stay now." And beneath that, in small letters, Anna Elliot didn't cry. But the house did. He felt it in the walls. The soft groan of relief, of something deep beneath the roots finally letting go. It had been a week since Anna. A week of restless nights in stranger towns, of waking at odd hours with the sensation that someone had been whispering to him just before his eyes opened. The journal hadn't written anything since that final note beneath the floor, and for a while Elliot wondered if it had finally ended. That maybe, just maybe, Anna was the last name he was supposed to remember. But he knew better. These things didn't just stop. Not unless you stopped. And even then, they had a way of catching up. The next trail wasn't a town or a map, or a story shared at a diner booth. It came from a photo. He found it slipped beneath his motel room door. No note, just a photograph, old, torn at the edges. The kind you'd find in the back of a rusted filing cabinet. It showed a family, a mother, a father, 2 daughters standing on the front steps of a modest farmhouse. Their expressions were blank. Not somber, just hollow. As if they hadn't quite figured out how to pretend they were happy. But what chilled him was what stood in the background. A mirror. Tall, oval-shaped. Leaning against the wall just behind the family. And in the reflection, there was someone else. A figure standing where no one stood in the actual photograph. No features. Just a shape. Elliot turned the photo over. One word scrawled in pencil: "Come see us smile." He didn't know the town, but the landscape in the photo had its own clues. An old water tower with Mile Carry painted across its rust-streaked side, barely legible in the distance. That was enough. By sunset the next day, he was there. The house was still standing. Still weathered, still quiet. Still wrapped in the kind of calm that wasn't peace. But waiting, it didn't look threatening. If anything, it looked sad, as if it missed being remembered. The door creaked open before he touched it. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of photochemicals. Faint. Sore. The living room was lined with framed portraits. Families, couples, children. But none of them smiled. Every frame was slightly tilted. None had dust. That was the first thing he noticed. The cleanliness. Too clean for a house that had clearly been abandoned. He stepped into the hallway. More portraits. All eyes followed him. Not in the figurative sense. They moved, slowly, watching. The journal stayed silent. But Elliot could feel it pressing against his side like it was tense, waiting. He entered the parlor next, where the mirror from the photograph stood against the wall. It looked exactly the same. And in it, Elliot saw himself. But not. His reflection stared back. Same clothes, same stance. But its face was smiling. wide, unnatural, like someone had pulled the skin too tight. And then the reflection blinked, not in sync with him. Elliot stepped back. The reflection did not. It just kept smiling. Behind him, a picture frame fell to the floor with a sharp crack. He turned. The portrait that had fallen was the same one from the photo. The family. But now, they were smiling. Wide. Too wide. The girls' heads tilted slightly, just enough to make it wrong. The mother's eyes had changed direction. She was looking straight at him. The photo had updated itself, and from the walls, a soft rustling started. Paper sliding against paper. Photographs moving in their frames, shifting, smiling, one by one. Each portrait on the wall now bore a grin, distorted, puppet-like, and from the parlor the mirror spoke. Not aloud, in his head, a woman's voice, soft southern, almost sweet. "You didn't ask to see us, but now you will." He turned back to the mirror. His reflection had moved. It now stood behind the glass, pressed against it, hands out, as if trapped on the wrong side, and then it knocked 3 times. Elliot stumbled backward. The journal snapped open. New ink bloomed. "Don't smile back." He looked again. All the faces in the frames were grinning now, teeth wide, too many, gums exposed. Some of the smiles were bleeding at the corners, and his reflection in the mirror had begun to change. Skin bubbling like old photo paper in heat, features melting, reshaping. It raised one hand and pressed a finger to its lips, then pointed to the back hallway. Elliot didn't want to follow, but he knew the house wouldn't let him leave until he did, so he walked. Each step triggered a click behind him, like a camera shutter. The portraits were taking pictures of him, or worse, copying him. At the end of the hallway was a door that hadn't been there before. A dark room. The red light seeped through the cracks around the frame, pulsing. He opened it. Inside, hundreds of photographs hung on lines with clothespins. Every one was of him. Sleeping, eating, sitting in the car. All moments he'd been alone. All moments someone had been watching. And in the center of the room, pinned on a corkboard, was a single note: "We only needed your smile." Suddenly, from every photo, his own face shifted, smiling, grinning, sneering, as if the house had collected every version of him and was reshaping him into something else. Behind him, the mirror in the parlor cracked. Once, twice, then shattered, and the smiling reflection stepped through. Real, solid, it reached toward him. Expression frozen in glee. Elliot backed into the dark room, heart pounding, pulling a matchbook from his coat. He didn't think, he knew. This room was the memory, the hive, the collector. He struck the match and tossed it. The film went first. Then the photos curled, blistered, blackened. The smoke was acrid, thick with chemicals and screams. Not human ones. Not exactly. The reflection in the hallway twisted, screamed, melted like celluloid, and vanished. By the time the fire died down, the house was dark again, silent, and every portrait on the wall had turned blank. No smiles, no faces, just empty squares of faded photo paper. Elliot stepped outside as dawn broke. In his journal, one final line appeared: "We wanted to be remembered, but you made us seen." He closed the book. The road stretched ahead, and somewhere out there, another house waited, one with no smiles at all. The rain followed him for hours. Not a downpour, just a thin, persistent drizzle that painted everything in gray and left the world tasting like rust. Elliot didn't mind the wet. What unsettled him was how the rain seemed to stop whenever he passed under certain trees, or how the clouds broke only when he pulled off the road to check his map. It was like something overhead was adjusting itself to him, watching, not with eyes, but with presence. By the time he reached the town of Dredge Hollow, the fog had rolled in thick. Street signs appeared too late to read. Houses passed in blinks. The town felt buried in its own breath, and Elliot realized quickly that no one was out. No cars, no lights behind windows. Just empty storefronts and silhouettes behind curtains that never shifted. It didn't feel abandoned. It felt occupied by people who didn't want to be seen. The motel had one room left. Number 9. The key was cold in his hand. Even though it had just come from the front desk, the girl behind the counter didn't ask for his name. She didn't ask for anything, really. She just pushed the key toward him with a hand that shook more than it should have, eyes wide. Jaw clenched like she was holding back something she wasn't allowed to say. The room was clean. Too clean. Sheets tucked with military precision. No dust. No scent of human living. It didn't feel slept in. It felt set, staged, like a waiting room for something else. He dropped his bag, sat on the bed, and opened the journal. Nothing. Then, faintly, a smear of ink formed at the bottom of the last page. He knocks twice. Never open on the second. Elliot frowned, then heard it. Knock. Just one. Sharp. Definite. From the hallway. He stood, heart already pounding, and moved to the door. Peaceful, empty. No shadows, no shapes. He didn't open it. But the second knock never came. Instead, the power went out. The lights didn't flicker. They popped, like veins bursting. A soft crackle followed from the vent above. And then, faintly, a sound like breathing, but wrong. Too slow, too deep. Elliot pulled his coat tight and stepped outside. The hallway was empty, no sound. Just the faint smell of singed wires and old cologne. Then, at the end of the corridor, he saw him. A man, standing perfectly still. Too still. Elliot called out, "Hey!" But the man didn't flinch, didn't turn. He wore a long coat, black and wet. Shoes polished. No hat, no visible face. Just the sharp silhouette of someone not surprised to be seen. And as Elliot stepped forward, the man tilted. Not like a person. Like a hinge. As if he were fixed to the air by something we couldn't see. Then suddenly gone. Vanished mid-tilt. The hall was empty again. Elliot didn't breathe until he was back inside the room, journal open. Now, the page was full. You've seen him now. That means he'll try again. Don't let him speak. He barely had time to process it when the window rattled. Softly. Once. Then again. A slow scrape against the glass followed, as if something was dragging a nail across it, not to break in, but to remind him it could. He didn't look. He pulled the curtain shut, then taped the journal to his chest with duct tape from the motel's utility drawer. And he waited. It didn't take long. Knock. From the bathroom door this time. Then the sound of dripping. Slow. Steady. He entered carefully. The mirror was fogged, but the water wasn't running. On the counter, drawn with a fingertip in the condensation, let me in. He wiped the glass. Nothing behind him. But when he turned to leave, the man was in the shower. Standing. Motionless. Coat soaked. Head bowed. No sound. No breath. Elliot backed up. Didn't blink. Didn't move. Then the man lifted his head, but had no face. Just skin where features should have been. Mouth sewn shut. Eyes erased. Only the impression of someone who had once been human. And when he stepped forward, the sound that came wasn't a footstep. It was the sound of a door unlocking. Elliot ran. Out of the room. Into the hallway. Every door he passed stood open now, revealing exact replicas of room 9. Same furniture. Same bedspread. Same Elliot, sitting motionless in each one. Head tilted, staring forward with a hollow, dead grin. And behind him the footsteps came. But not like normal steps. They sounded like memories. Like voices he forgot he heard. Like his own childhood cries on cassette tape. He burst through the lobby. Empty. The girl at the desk was gone. But a note had been left for him, handwritten in thick black marker, "Don't follow his voice. Not even if it sounds like your own." Outside, the fog had thickened, but the man was waiting by the car. No movement, no approach, just watching. Elliot did the only thing he could. He stared back. He watched the watcher. Minutes passed, maybe hours, but the man didn't move. He just faded, molecule by molecule. And then he was gone. No sound. No breath. No goodbye. Back in his room, the mirror was shattered. And on the shards, someone had written, "There are things you should not see. You've seen too many." Elliot collapsed onto the bed, exhausted but unable to sleep. because he knew the man who wasn't there hadn't left. He was just waiting for the third knock. There was something wrong with the hill. Elliot felt it before he saw it, long before he realized what the road led to. The land itself buckled subtly, like a bruise beneath skin, rising in a slope that wasn't natural. There were no houses nearby, no structures, not even a fence. Just a dirt road that led up a narrow incline through scattered trees that looked too thin and too old all at once. And at the top, standing alone, was a door, not a house, not ruins, just a door. Wooden, painted red, slightly ajar. Fixed upright in the middle of an empty clearing. No frame, no hinges, no walls. Just the door. It shouldn't have stood, shouldn't have remained upright in the wind, but it did, immobile, impossible. A solitary object that radiated wrongness. Elliot parked far down the slope, as if the car might vanish if brought too close. Every instinct he had screamed at him to leave it alone. But instincts, he'd learned, were often the first things the strange places tried to break. He stepped toward it. The air grew colder with each footstep, not by temperature, but pressure, like standing beneath deep water. His chest tightened, his hearing muffled. He could hear his pulse between his ears, and then he reached the clearing. There it stood, the red door. Not glowing, not whispering, just being. Elliot circled it once. No markings on the back, no signs of a foundation. The grass around it had died in a perfect circle, burned not with fire, but with absence. As if nothing had ever lived there. He stepped closer, and saw the writing on the door, etched faintly in the wood, go through. Leave something behind, that was all. No signature, no name, no symbol. He pulled out the journal. It was already open. New entry. This door was never built. It arrived. He stared at the line, reading it again and again. The wording felt ancient, like something passed down in whispers. He closed the journal, gripped the doorknob, and waited. What would he leave behind? That's what it asked. What would he give up to pass? He pressed his forehead to the wood and felt it breathe. Warm, alive, hungry. Then, without warning, the door opened inward, just a crack, and from the dark beyond it, something whispered. Not in words, but in memories. He heard his mother's voice from when he was 6. The creak of the bed in the room he'd tried to forget. The smell of fire from Greystone Hollow. Lucy's voice, Anna's laughter, Clara's crying, the rattle from the crib, the man's knock. Everything. It played all at once, not around him. Inside him. As if opening the door had cracked something deeper, something inside Elliot that wasn't supposed to break. He could close it now, step away, forget it ever existed. But of course, he didn't. He stepped through, and the world flipped. There was no falling, no swirling of colors, just reversal. Suddenly he was standing in another field, but the sky was wrong, not black, not blue, just blank, white without sun or cloud. The trees bent backward, the grass grew downward, and the air smelled like old photographs and hospital corridors. Before him stood a house, but no door, a house with no entrance, just windows sealed tight, shutters bolted, walls that looked like they breathed. And inside one of the windows, he saw himself, watching, no reflection, an observer, expression blank, eyes wide, and behind that version of him stood people, familiar ones, the girls he'd named Lucy, Clara, Anna, and others he hadn't met yet, others he might still meet. They weren't trapped. They weren't begging. They were waiting. Elliot tried to move, but the grass grabbed at his boots. Each blade tightened like fingers. He reached for the journal, gone, not in his coat, not in his hand, just gone. And from the house, no sound, just pressure, like a presence leaning over his shoulder, whispering, "You came through. Now give us what you brought." He looked down. His pockets were empty, except for one thing, the first photograph, the one that had started it all. Greystone Hollow. He pulled it out. The photo had changed. The house was gone, replaced by the red door, and in front of it him, staring upward, smiling. He hadn't smiled in weeks. He tore the photo in half, and the world screamed. The grass let go. The sky blinked. The door behind him slammed shut and vanished. He was back, in the clearing. The door no longer stood, only a charred outline where it had been. The journal lay open in the dirt. This time, only 2 words appeared: "You're not alone." Elliot picked it up. His fingers trembled. Not from fear, from realization. The places he'd visited, they weren't isolated, they were connected. By memory, by loss, by him. And whatever waited at the end, behind all these haunted rooms and broken names, it already knew who he was, and it was calling him closer. The motel was nowhere on the map. Elliot didn't remember checking in, didn't remember seeing the road turn into gravel. But when he opened his eyes, he was already inside, room 217, wallpaper peeling at the corners, a single lamp flickering weakly beside the bed. His journal lay open on the nightstand, though he didn't remember taking it out. The only sound was the fan above the bed, spinning slowly, lazily, until he noticed it wasn't plugged in. He sat up. Something about the silence felt watched. Not interrupted, not broken, observed. As if the quiet itself was listening to him, waiting for his breath to catch, his pulse to rise. The air vent above the mirror rattled. Just once, then again. The second time, it sounded like someone whispered through it, not clear, not loud. But words, wet ones. He stood and moved to the mirror. In it, he looked thinner. Not exhausted, worn down, like the version of him that stared back was slightly out of sync, slightly behind. His eyes didn't blink at the same time. His breath fogged the glass before he exhaled. He turned his back on it and looked up at the vent. It rattled again. Louder this time. He pulled a chair to it, climbed up, and leaned close. It wasn't dust inside. It was black, like soot or ink had run through the shaft. And then, as he listened, a voice whispered again. More distinct. "You left us behind." He jerked back. The words didn't sound angry. They sounded hurt. He dropped down and flipped open the journal. The page had already changed. They lived between the walls. They remember. He looked around. This wasn't just a room. It was a vessel, a kind of holding space. Something designed not to trap, but to preserve. The wallpaper had symbols beneath it, shapes like fractured spirals, hidden by the floral print. When he peeled back a section, he saw names etched in charcoal. Dozens, maybe hundreds, not scrawled. Not angry, just recorded. As if someone had documented every voice the vent had ever carried. And they were all still in there. He climbed back up to the vent and whispered, "I'm sorry." Silence, then a scraping, and a photograph slid out of the grate, landing on the chair. Elliot picked it up. It was a photo of him, asleep in this room, taken from above, his chest burned. Not from fear, but from the feeling that something had been inside with him long before he woke. The back of the photo had a new message. Open the crawl space. He looked down. Under the bed, the carpet had a rough patch, pulled at the corners. He knelt, yanked it aside. A square of plywood. He hesitated, then pried it up. The hole beneath wasn't deep, but it went far. Farther than the building should have allowed. He took the flashlight from the nightstand, climbed in, and crawled. The air smelled of mildew and copper. Dust coated the walls like skin, but the deeper he moved, the more clean the tunnel became. Too clean. No bugs, no webs, just smooth surfaces and faint scratches, like fingernails had marked the path. And then, breathing. Elliot froze. It came from ahead. Slow, shaky, and not quite human. He crept forward. And the crawl space opened into a wider chamber, a forgotten space sealed beneath the motel. A dim, swaying light bulb hung above. In its flickering glow, he saw them. Photos, hundreds of them, taped to every wall. All of him. Different days. Different clothes, different rooms. Some he hadn't even been to yet. And in the middle of the room, a chair. Occupied. By himself. But older. Gaunt. Dressed in gray. Eyes sunken, staring at nothing. Mouth open like it had been screaming for years without sound. He stepped closer. The figure blinked. Once. Slowly. Then turned to look at him. "You're late," it said. Elliot staggered back. You, what are you? The man didn't smile, didn't flinch. I'm what you'll leave behind. When the rooms are done with you. When the names have eaten your voice. The bulb flickered harder now, buzzing like flies. You crawled into your own end, it added. And then, everything shifted. The crawl space collapsed behind him. The walls shook. The photos peeled themselves off and hovered in the air. A wind started. But there was no way for air to move this deep underground. The man in the chair began to rot right in front of him. Skin flaked. Teeth blackened, eyes turned to ink. And as the body crumbled, the photographs ignited, one by one in bursts of blue flame. Elliot screamed and dove through the flames, clawing toward the only exit that remained. A sliver of light at the far end. He broke through, into the motel bathroom. The tub overflowed with water, though no faucet ran. Steam coated the mirror. And in the condensation, a new message the voices still remember. So should you. He turned. The vent rattled once more, then stopped. When he opened the journal again, one final line glowed faintly beneath a scorched corner of the page. The names aren't the only ones trapped. Some versions of you never left. He didn't sleep that night. He couldn't. Because every time the vent clicked, he could hear himself breathing back. The next town wasn't marked. It wasn't listed on maps, GPS, or in the memory of the gas station clerk who swore he'd lived in the area his whole life and had never heard of a place called Dovetail. But Elliot had the address scribbled on a napkin, shoved beneath his windshield wiper at a rest stop 3 counties back. Just 6 numbers and a street name that didn't seem to exist. Until he drove far enough and the road changed without warning. The asphalt ended, the trees pulled back, and there it was. Not a town, not even a street. Just a single building standing alone in a field choked with tall grass and damp air. A motel. No sign, no name, no front desk. Just room 5, painted in flaking gold on the only door that wasn't boarded shut. Elliot stepped out of the car, gravel crunching under his boots. The wind picked up only when he approached the room. As if the structure breathed, he reached the door. There was no lock, no handle, only a keyhole with no visible purpose. And the moment his fingers brushed the wood, the journal in his coat opened by itself. Ink swelled like blood seeping through gauze. It knows you now. Let it in before it takes the choice away. The door creaked open. And beyond it, his old apartment. The one from 2 years ago, exactly as it was the night before it all began. Even the stain on the carpet was there, even the mug on the counter. He stepped inside and the door slammed behind him. The air didn't just smell like memory, it was memory. Frozen, preserved, recreated with such impossible precision that even the receipt under the lamp was time-stamped to the exact moment he'd forgotten. But something was off. The walls felt closer, tighter, and then, from the kitchen, movement. He tensed, and she stepped out. Marla. He hadn't seen her since the night she disappeared. But she looked exactly the same. Not older, not changed. Still barefoot, still wearing the old college sweatshirt she'd borrowed from him that one rainy week in October. Elliot, she said softly, as if she'd just woken up and found him across the room. His throat closed. He stepped forward, arms instinctively reaching. But she didn't move. She didn't blink. Her voice remained flat. You never came back. He froze. I tried, he whispered. Something happened. The house. The girls. I didn't forget you. You didn't leave. You were already gone. You just took longer to realize it. She raised her hand and pointed to the hallway. Elliot turned. The hallway shouldn't have been there. His apartment had never had one, but now it stretched endlessly, flickering with pale, sputtering lights. And on either side, doors, all identical, all labeled room 5. He looked back. Marla was gone. The room was gone. Only the hallway remained. The journal grew warm in his coat. He pulled it out. New entry. No words, just a sketch. A map of the hallway with one door circled in red. The 10th on the left. He counted it, heart racing. footsteps echoing louder than they should have. When he reached it, he paused. The doorknob was warm, not from heat, from use. He opened it, and found himself back in the same motel room. But it was different. The window showed an ocean this time, and someone was in the bed. Elliot stepped closer. It was himself, sleeping, unaware, alive. He didn't look peaceful. He looked trapped in a dream, sweating, mumbling, a nightmare playing behind closed eyes. Elliot reached out, but stopped just before his fingers touched his other self. The sleeping version of him whimpered, said one word. Don't. The room breathed again. Walls shifted, curtains danced without wind, and from the hallway another voice, his voice, calling, come back. You forgot something. He turned toward the door, but it was gone. Only a mirror now, and in it, a reflection of himself with no face. Just smooth skin, a mouth carved too wide, eyes that blinked from inside the flesh. He stumbled backward. The room around him darkened. The sleeping Elliot vanished. Only the journal remained, open on the bed, its pages on fire, but not burning. One line repeated endlessly across the sheets, this room will follow you, every place you go, until you choose to stay in one of them forever. Elliot grabbed it and ran. Through the mirror, into another hall. This one wasn't numbered. The walls blood. The lights buzzed without turning on. At the end, one last door, unlabeled, wooden, familiar. He pushed it open and stepped back into his car. Still parked, still raining. As if nothing had happened, except the journal sat open in his lap, and the passenger's seat beside him was wet. As if someone else had just gotten out. He started the engine. Didn't look back, but when he passed the rearview mirror, he saw room 5, still behind him. In every reflection, in every window, following. The radio turned itself on at exactly 3:17 a.m. Elliot had been driving for hours, eyelids heavy, road signs melting into nothing but blurs in the corners of his vision. He hadn't touched the dial. His phone had no signal. He didn't even remember turning the car on. But the static that filled the cabin was thick and alive, curling around him like breath on glass. Not the clean hiss of a dead station. This static had rhythm, like it was hiding words beneath the fuzz. He reached to switch it off, but before he could, the station cut to a voice. Female, familiar, flat. Oh, you're almost there, Elliot. Keep driving. He froze. It wasn't Marla's voice, or Lucy's, or Anna's. It was his mother, dead since he was 17. She hadn't said his name aloud in nearly 2 decades, and now it came from his dashboard like it had never left her lips. Oh, you have to go back before you reach the tunnel. If you don't, you won't come back at all. The static returned before he could respond. Then another voice broke through. This time, his own. Ignore her. She always begged me to turn around, but we're not going back, are we? The pitch was off. His voice, yes, but spoken with a lilt that made the skin at the base of his neck tighten. Elliot reached for the volume. The dial turned the opposite way, on its own. The volume climbed. More voices poured in, not random. All versions of him, from different days, different memories. Some angry, some begging. One sobbing. One laughing too hard. One just whispering, you already left. You just haven't caught up with yourself yet. The headlights cut across a sign, Roke's Hollow, 3 miles. Not a place he recognized. But somehow, he knew the name. He reached for the journal. It wasn't on the seat. It was on the radio. Open. Pages fluttering in the non-existent wind. A new line had appeared. There's only one station that plays the truth. Find it before they start broadcasting from you. Elliot turned the dial slowly. Every station spoke back. Not music, not news, just himself arguing, denying, laughing, screaming, even lying. Then, silence, 88.1. A full second of stillness. No voice, no fuzz. Just the absence of anything at all. He kept it there. The headlights flickered. And then, he saw it. A tunnel up ahead. Black, long, yawning like a mouth carved into the hillside. No lights inside. No exit visible. His mother's voice came back on 88.1. Different this time. Softer. Sad. He never listened. Not when it mattered. Elliot's hands tightened on the wheel. He slowed the car. The tunnel loomed, swallowing the road in shadow. And then he saw someone standing at the mouth. A silhouette. Thin, still, wearing his face. It raised a hand and pointed to the radio. He turned the volume up. No voice this time. Only the sound of breathing. Not from the speakers, from behind him. He looked in the rearview mirror. His own eyes stared back. Not from the mirror, from the back seat. A second Elliot. Paler, eyes sunken, lips cracked. "You always make the wrong choice," the thing in the back said. Then it began to climb forward. He slammed the brakes. The car stopped just before the tunnel's edge. He leapt out, heart hammering, gravel skidding underfoot. Inside the car, the doppelganger watched him through the windshield. Then slowly, it reached up and turned the dial. Static again. Only this time, the words buried in it were names. Lucy, Clara, Anna, Marla, all of them repeated like a prayer, like a curse. Elliot backed away. The car's headlights shut off, then flicked on again, red this time. The journal flung itself onto the hood. New lines scratched into its leather-covered drive forward, and you disappear. Walk back, and you'll never stop hearing them. So what will you leave behind this time? He didn't choose. He turned and ran. The tunnel never came closer, but the voices stayed behind him, bleeding out of the air, tangled in the wind, whispering through leaves that didn't move. When he finally stopped, he was back at the last gas station he remembered. The clerk stared at him like she'd seen a ghost. "Thought you were just here an hour ago," she said. "You needed gas. Said you were heading to Dovetail." "I never left," he murmured, but he had. Some version of him did, and he had no idea which one came back. The car was gone. The journal remained in his hand, and in its pages, a new phrase burned itself in. "There are more of you than there are roads. Be careful which one takes the wheel next." Elliot hadn't used a landline in years, but when he found the rusted payphone, standing alone beside a cornfield, he felt something pull him toward it, like gravity, but sideways. There was no signpost, no sidewalk, no wires overhead. Just the phone. Just the field. Just him. The receiver dangled on its cord, swinging slightly, even though the wind had gone dead still. It began ringing the moment he was close enough to hear it. Not the distant trill of a normal phone. This ring was slow, wet, like something being dragged across metal. It didn't echo. It leaked into the air, thick and pressing, like it wanted inside his ears. He didn't plan to answer it, but his hand did. He picked it up before he could stop himself. At first, there was only breath, shallow, close, intimate. Then, a voice, one he hadn't heard in years. "You left me there, in the cold. I called, Elliot. I called and you never answered." His stomach dropped. It was his brother's voice. Thomas had died in a car crash when they were kids. There had never been a call, no final words, no chance to say goodbye. But now, he was speaking like he'd never stopped. "I waited. The house said you'd come back. It promised. But you left the door open. Things got in." Elliot gripped the receiver tighter. "Thomas, what are you talking about? You should have stayed in room 5, Thomas whispered. It was the only one that didn't lie. The line crackled, switched. "A woman now, Clara. I dreamed about you. In the mirror. But your mouth was gone. You kept trying to scream, but all that came out was my name." Then another. "Lucy, you shouldn't have buried us in the floor." "Elliot, we were never dead, just waiting for you to remember." He slammed the receiver down, stepped back, but the phone kept ringing. No longer dangling, it was standing upright, as if someone else was holding it from the other end. He ran, didn't look back, but every few steps, he heard it ring again, over and over, following him, and with each ring a new voice joined in. Marla, Anna, his mother, all of them weaving together into one endless call. He drove for hours, no destination, just distance. But the sound followed, whining up from air vents, whispering from the static of the radio, humming in the pulse of the road. When he finally stopped to rest in a roadside motel, there was no check-in desk. Just a phone on the nightstand. It rang the moment he shut the door. He let it ring 10, 20, 30 times. Then it stopped, he exhaled, sat down. But then it started again. And this time, he answered without meaning to. The voice on the other end was his own. You shouldn't have picked up the first time. Now we know where you are. Click, deadline. Then the phone rang again. Elliot yanked it from the wall. Silence, until the TV turned on by itself. The screen buzzed. No image. Just that same dragging ring, slowed to half speed. Ring, ring, ring. The sound scraped the edges of his teeth. He reached for the journal. New ink, you answered. That's all it needs. What is it? He whispered. But the journal only gave him a number 7135196, a phone number, a code. He didn't know. He wrote it down anyway, just in case. The next morning, he tried to leave town, but every road looped back to the same intersection. No matter which turn he made, the gas station came into view again. And every time, the payphone out front was ringing. It never stopped. He walked over, unplugged it. It kept ringing. He ripped it out of the wall. Still ringing. The journal buzzed in his pocket like a second heart. He opened it. Final line on the page. They don't want to talk. They want to connect. That night, he wrapped the receiver in chains, locked it in the motel sink, and filled the basin with water. It didn't matter. At 3:17 a.m., his cell phone lit up. No service, no signal, no incoming call. Just one word across the screen, answer. He didn't. Not this time. And for once, it stopped ringing. But in the silence that followed, he realized the real sound had changed. He could now hear the dial tone in his dreams. And somewhere in that endless, humming flatline, someone was still waiting on the other end. Elliot hadn't meant to drive west. He wasn't following the compass anymore. Those needles spun in every direction now, as if even magnetism refused to point toward where he was going. Still, the sky looked different that morning. Less like dawn, more like something pretending to be it. The sun hadn't risen so much as appeared, too high and too cold. The clouds didn't move. They just hovered, as if painted on glass. He drove toward the horizon anyway, chasing the false light, until he saw the green highway sign overhead. Not painted, but etched into rusted metal, EXITZO FOARNARD ONLY, no mileage, no directions, no arrows, just the promise of somewhere else. The road narrowed. 4 lanes became 2, then 1, then gravel. And at the end of that path, a toll booth. Unmanned, but with the barrier down. The window was covered in dust, but a single note had been scrawled across the glass with what looked like a cracked fingerbone and pigoi duith nomo yet uou remum mber. There was a slot beneath it. Elliot stared at the booth for a long time, then reached into the glove compartment and pulled out a photo. His father, fishing. The last time they'd spoken before the arguments. Before the silence. He slid it into the slot. The barrier didn't lift. Another note appeared beside the first, bleeding into the glass like ink from beneath. Tate Mo, ASNT, Eno GH. He tried another, his old apartment key. Then the receipt from the diner where he and Marla had once talked about names for children they'd never have. Then the small silver pendant Clara had pressed into his palm in that impossible hallway of mirrors. Still nothing. At last, he opened the journal, tore out the first page, the one that had appeared after the house in Greystone. It started here, he whispered. Take it. And the slot sucked it in like breath. The barrier lifted, just like that. No fanfare, no movement, just gone. And beyond it, the road was no longer gravel. It was old cobblestone, dark and wet, gleaming like it had rained in a place that forgot water. He drove through. Behind him, the barrier slammed back down. The exit sign vanished. The air grew thick, harder to breathe. Not because it was heavy, but because something inside it resisted his lungs. He saw movement ahead, shadows, walking in pairs, disappearing behind trees that bent away from the road, as if bowing in retreat. A figure stood at the next bend. Back turned, still, waiting. As Elliot approached, he slowed. It was him. Not a twin, not another version. Just him dressed the same, breathing the same, blinking in sync. The other Elliot turned his head slightly, without looking back. "If you pass me," he said, "you won't be able to come back." Elliot stepped out of the car. "I don't want to come back." The double nodded. "You will. That's why I'm still here." And then he walked backwards into the trees. Without sound, without footprint. The cobblestone path began to wend upward, steeper, and the sky dimmed. Not night, just less of everything, like the world itself was wearing thin. And then he saw it, the exit sign again. But this time, hanging from the branches of a dead tree, EXIT0 no Mobuware left. Beneath it, another toll booth, no barrier, no slot, just a mirror, hanging where the window should have been. He looked into it, and saw nothing, no reflection, just the road behind it, leading into a forest made of names. Every tree trunk was carved. Anna, Clara, Lucy, Marla, Thomas, and more. Names he hadn't heard yet, names he hadn't earned yet. The mirror flickered. A message appeared across the bottom. Yo you, Alani 8 Isai, yo you GSTD, ID and no ICE. Elliot stumbled back, looked behind him. The road was gone, the car was gone. Only forest, only silence. Only the distant ringing of a phone that had never stopped calling. He reached for the journal. But it, too, had vanished. Only one thing remained in his pocket, the bone from the first booth. Now engraved with a new word stay. He tried to scream. But the air didn't let him. It pressed against his voice. And from the forest, something began to whisper his name. But not as a warning. As a welcome. As if he'd just come home. Elliot stood at the edge of the forest, unable to move. Not frozen by fear, but by something deeper. Like the earth beneath his feet refused to allow motion. The trees no longer resembled trees. They were tall, yes, branching. Yes, but their bark pulsed faintly, as though blood moved inside them. The names carved into their trunks glistened, fresh and raw, like open wounds instead of etchings. When did not pass through here. Time didn't either. He stepped forward. Just 1 foot. The ground accepted it. The forest opened, not with sound, but with intent. Branches curved aside. Shadows split down the middle. It was waiting for him. Had always been. The forest, if it was that, didn't lead anywhere. It was the destination. The deeper he walked, the more he saw things move in the corners of his vision. Low to the ground, impossibly fast, darting between tree roots and flickering like damaged film frames. Shapes. Elongated. Loping. None of them dared step into the path, but they kept pace. Always just out of reach, he passed more trees. More names. He began to recognize them. People he hadn't met yet. People he had. His own name. Over and over. Scrawled dozens of times, always just a little different. Sometimes with his middle name. Sometimes not. Sometimes dated. Sometimes accompanied by coordinates or symbols or drawings that bled into the bark. He didn't remember carving any of them. But the forest did. After what felt like hours, or minutes, time had lost meaning. He came to a clearing. At the center a house, old, shapeless. It seemed to reform each time he looked at it. Sometimes with a slanted roof, sometimes a flat one. Shutters opened, then vanished. Chimneys appeared and faded. A structure dreaming of its own identity. On the porch sat a rocking chair, and in it, a figure wrapped in blankets, face hidden beneath a wide, brimmed hat. Elliot approached. The figure didn't move, but as he stepped onto the porch, the rocking chair stopped. Silence. Then you walk too far. They usually stop before this. The voice was neither male nor female. It was old. Worn. Not by years, but by knowing too much for too long. I didn't have a choice, Elliot said. The figure laughed, a dry, cracked sound like paper tearing slowly. You always have a choice. You just didn't like any of them. It raised its head. Elliot flinched. There was no face. Just the outline of one, like someone had pressed their hand into soft clay and called it a man. Why am I here? He asked. Because you kept going. Because you answered the phone. Because you walked through the door that had no house. Because you remembered names that weren't yours to carry. I didn't mean to. No one ever does. That's what makes it stick. The figure stood. Too tall, bones clicking. Limbs unfolding like a spider emerging from a curled leaf. It moved to the door. You're at the place between places now, it said, where the rooms end and the real things begin. The door opened without touch. Inside, darkness, but not black. It was alive, not filled with light, but filled with awareness. He stepped forward, hesitated. The figure placed something in his hand, a page, ripped from his journal. Blank. Except for one sentence, what you write here becomes real. I don't want that kind of power, Elliot said. The faceless figure tilted its head. You already used it. Every time you remembered a name. Every time you believed what the room told you. This, it gestured to the house, the forest, the stillness, isn't here because you arrived. It's here because you expected it. I didn't know. Exactly. It closed the door behind him. Elliot stood in a foyer that led nowhere. No stairs. No rooms. Just walls covered in mirrors, none of which reflected him. Instead, they showed places he'd been. Clara's attic. Room 5. The hallway of hands. The nursery that rocked itself. But in each reflection, he wasn't in the room. He was watching it. From a distance. Like a memory trying to look backward. In the final mirror, he saw something else. The present. This house. And behind him, filling the space he had just walked through, figures. Dozens. Silent. Faceless. Every one of them an echo of a version of him that must have chosen wrong. One stepped forward and placed its hand on the glass. So did Elliot. But where his fingers touched, the mirror didn't feel cold. It felt like skin. The faceless version spoke without a mouth. You have to finish the list. What list? The names. The ones who never got out. Elliot pulled the page from his hand, the blank one. Ink began to crawl across it like a spider weaving a web. Maralo a chamas L-U-C-Y-N-A and then more. Ones he didn't know. Devia, Darren, My C-H-A-E-L, 20, 40, 50 dozens more. He watched as the paper filled itself, then stopped, one line left. The final name hadn't written itself. It waited for him. He raised the pen, paused. The mirror in front of him clouded, cracked. The glass began to ripple. A voice behind him whispered, "If you write your name, you stay. If you leave it blank, you become one of us." Elliot didn't turn. He stared at the paper, at the empty space, and then he began to write, but not his name. Just one word, exit. The mirrors shattered, the walls collapsed, and from the collapsing house, light poured in, not warm, not bright, but enough to walk toward. He ran, didn't stop, didn't look back. The house behind him screamed, not with sound, but with memory. Crashing, clawing, begging. But he didn't stop. He passed the edge of the forest and fell, onto cold asphalt, back on the road, back in a world that almost looked like the one he remembered. Almost. Except there were no more signs, no more names, and no more pages in his journal. Just one final phrase, etched into the back cover like it had always been there. The ones who stop are the ones who become what they were running from. And the silence, at last, had stopped waiting. It had started watching. The road didn't end this time. It simply faded, dissolving into dirt and then to nothing. There were no tire tracks behind Elliot, no birds overhead, not even the comfort of wind. Just a flat, gray horizon where everything hummed quietly, like the last note of a song no one remembered starting. And then, out of nowhere, a building rose into view. Its shape wrong somehow, flickering between architectures. One moment, it looked like a church. The next, a courthouse. Then, something resembling a child's drawing of a house, all crooked windows and lopsided towers. The only constant was the sign carved above its doorway in uneven, chiseled letters The Museum OFWHWLDELVB. Elliot stood there for a long time, unsure if this was a warning, a trap, or a place he'd already visited and forgotten. But the door opened slowly, creaking inward on its own, revealing a long hallway lined with frames. Not paintings, not photographs, reflections. He stepped in, and the door closed behind him without a sound. Each frame showed a version of him, not static, moving, living. One frame showed him sitting at a dinner table with a woman he didn't recognize. Two children laughing at something he'd just said. He looked tired but happy. That version of Elliot wore a simple ring on his left hand. And when he looked up from the plate, his eyes met Elliot's, as though he knew he was being watched. In the next frame, Elliot was in a padded room, clawing at the walls, screaming into the ceiling as if begging to be let out. No windows, no door, just the echoes of his own voice, raw and exhausted. Another frame showed him in a small bookstore, sorting through titles with a quiet kind of joy. He was older, weathered, but peaceful. Every version had a weight to it, a scent, a temperature. Some rooms behind the glass smelled like coffee or burnt wood, others like blood and smoke, and something rotten that used to be alive. He kept walking. The corridor didn't end. It only twisted, looping back on itself like a knot. Some frames were empty. Others were shattered, fragments of reflections still twitching inside the glass, their lips moving soundlessly, as if caught mid-scream or mid-laugh. He passed one broken frame where the eyes followed him, leaking dark fluid onto the floor, pooling like oil. The hallway led to a central chamber, a dome-shaped room with no walls, just one giant mirror, curved like the inside of an eye. In the center, a pedestal, and resting on it his journal, not a copy. His, he could feel it. He picked it up, but when he opened it, the pages were full, every one from start to finish. Stories he hadn't lived, names he didn't know, moments that hadn't happened, and yet they felt like his. As he flipped to the back, a new sentence burned itself across the final page. You've seen the lives you didn't live. Now choose which one follows you home. The mirror behind him rippled. He turned and saw himself again, but not as he was now. This version wore a black coat. His eyes were sunken, and there was nothing behind them, no thought, no hope. Just emptiness stretched too far. He didn't speak, just stepped forward. Another version emerged, then another, a dozen, 100, all him, all different, all waiting. Some cried, some laughed, one held a knife, one had no face at all. The dome trembled. The mirror began to pulse, and voices rose, not speaking to him, but as him. I never meant to forget. I just wanted to understand. I was supposed to be the last one. I'm not the echo. You are. And suddenly, Elliot knew. The museum didn't exist to show him what he missed. It existed to pick the version that would leave. Only one Elliot could exit. The rest would stay behind, cataloged, preserved, waiting in frames. He backed toward the entrance, but it was gone. Only glass, only reflections. And in every one, a version of him stepped closer. Then all at once, they spoke. Dozens of voices layered over one another decide. Elliot looked at the journal. Its cover now bore a question WOIO. He wanted to say none of them. He wanted to run. But his feet wouldn't move. Instead, a pen appeared in his hand. He didn't know where it came from. But he knew what it was for. He turned to the last page, now blank again. The dome shook. The glass cracked. One reflection lunged, but struck invisible glass and crumpled like a puppet. Another smiled. Waited. He wrote one word on the page now. The reflections all shattered. The journal slammed shut. The pedestal vanished, and the dome exploded into white. He opened his eyes to find himself in a field. Bright sun, clear sky, birdsong, a dirt road behind him. No museum, no mirror. Just the journal in his hand, warm, quiet, and one message across its back cover, now permanently burned into the leather. You didn't choose a version. You became one. He didn't know which version had left the museum, but something followed, and it still looked exactly like him. For the first time in what felt like weeks, Elliot saw blue sky. Real sky, not painted or flickering or mirrored. The clouds moved like they should. The air held warmth that didn't feel manufactured. It was almost enough to convince him he was finally back. That maybe the choice he made in the museum had delivered him into the life he was supposed to live. But the birds were silent. That was the first sign. He walked for hours through rolling fields and forgotten roads. Not a single car passed. Not a single person waved. The towns were hollowed out, not destroyed, just emptied. He came across a diner with its door still swinging open, coffee still warm in abandoned mugs. The TVs played static. Clocks ticked backward. Something was wrong. The journal had remained closed for 2 days, until now. As he stepped onto a bridge at dusk, its pages flipped without wind, opening to a page scrawled in hurried black ink. He's in now. You let him in when you looked too long. You gave him a place, no context, no name, just he. Elliot touched his reflection in the water below and felt the cold jolt, not of temperature, but of recognition. The reflection blinked a second too late. It wasn't the first time. The first hint had come a day ago, when he laughed at a joke in his head and realized his mouth hadn't moved. The laughter echoed from behind his eyes, like someone else had found the punchline first. Then, yesterday, when he reached to open a door, his hand paused mid-air for a beat too long, like something was debating whether to obey. Now, here on the bridge, the truth peeled itself loose. He stared into the water. His reflection no longer mirrored him. Its smile was too wide, its posture too relaxed, and then it waved. Elliot stumbled back. The journal flipped again. New sentence: you've been sharing your head since the hallway. He walks when you sleep. He learns when you lie. And now, he's ready to step forward. No, Elliot whispered. No, no, no. But even his voice sounded borrowed. He grabbed a shard of glass from the ground and stared at himself. His eyes were wrong. Not in color. Not in shape. In presence. One was slightly more curious, like it wasn't seeing the world for the 1000th time, but for the first. He dropped the glass. Ran. The horizon stayed the same. Sunset never ended. Time grew thick. Then a house. Not one he recognized, but it recognized him. The lights inside turned on. A silhouette moved behind the curtain. He approached carefully, every instinct in his body telling him to flee. But the journal vibrated again. The message had changed. He wants you to see what he built. The door creaked open. Inside, dozens of framed photos lined the walls. Elliot's life, but not as he remembered. Moments slightly off. In one, he stood at his high school graduation beside a woman who wasn't his mother. In another, he held a baby he never had. In yet another, he stood on a stage in a suit, smiling at a crowd that didn't exist. The house was a museum again, but this time, curated by the intruder. Each room held a different memory, warped and reassembled. A birthday with no guests. A wedding with no bride. A funeral with no casket. They weren't just illusions, they were options. A voice echoed through the hall, soft and slow. I didn't take anything. I just filled in what you dropped. Elliot turned. A man stood at the end of the hallway, dressed like him, built like him, but not him. He had his eyes, but only one of them was his. The other shimmered like polished stone. You weren't using all of it, the man said. So I did. Get out, Elliot growled. The figure chuckled. You already invited me. You wrote the doors open. I just stepped through. Elliot pulled the journal tight against his chest. I didn't mean to. But you meant something. That's all it takes. The lights flickered. The man blinked, and now he was closer. You're the story. I'm the author now. Elliot backed into the kitchen, grabbed a knife. The journal's pages fluttered one last time. Final warning. In red, you can't cut him out. You can only offer something bigger. What does that mean? Elliot shouted into the empty room. The man behind his eyes smiled wider. It means you make space, or I take it. Then Elliot understood. He had to write again. One final story. One final entry. He dropped the knife, grabbed a pen, and tore to the back of the journal. The figure lunged. Elliot scribbled furiously. Words he didn't think about, only felt. The rooms, the voices, the forest, the mirror, the choices, the exit, and then the lock. As the figure reached him, Elliot whispered the last word aloud, closed. Everything stopped. The man froze. The house groaned. And then collapsed, not into ruin, into memory. The walls faded to smoke. The windows dissolved into sky. The man behind his eyes staggered, and then vanished. Elliot fell to his knees. Alone again. For now. The journal, now heavy in his lap, wouldn't open anymore. Its cover glowed with a final phrase, "He'll wait until you forget again." And in the distance, behind the hills, a second sun began to rise. Dull, gray and watching. The second sun never blinked. It didn't rise, didn't move. It hovered, pinned to the sky like something hung on a wall for effect. Its light wasn't warm. It didn't cast shadows. Instead, it coated everything in a flat, dusty glow that made depth vanish. Trees became silhouettes. Roads vanished in pale haze. And Elliot, he wasn't sure if he was standing on the ground or in some endless photograph of it. He hadn't spoken since the house disappeared. He hadn't needed to. Not because there was no one around, but because something had started answering his thoughts. Whenever he considered turning back, the sky darkened. Whenever he looked at the journal, the second sun brightened, as if watching him through a tear in the atmosphere. The journal hadn't opened since he'd written closed. Its pages were stiff, sealed like wax, but Elliot could feel something alive beneath the leather cover. Breathing, not fast, but steady, patient. That morning, or what passed for morning, he followed a path etched into the tall, dry grass. A path that looked burned rather than walked. A perfect black line cut through the yellow stalks, twisting toward a distant hill. He didn't choose it. It was the only thing that existed in a world that was otherwise erasing itself inch by inch. At the top of the hill stood a sign, bent, crooked, almost apologetic. The words on it were hard to make out, but he knew what they were before he read them. Where are har? Below it, an arrow pointed straight down. To the ground, to the exact place his feet were planted. And there at his feet sat a single object, a mirror. Small, square, hand held. He crouched and picked it up. It reflected nothing, not even light. Just a blank, silver sheen, flat and featureless. Like it had given up the idea of showing anything ever again. He turned it over. One word etched in the back: when. Not where, not who, not even why. Just when. He stood, holding it up toward the second sun. And then the world around him blinked. That was the only word for it. Blinked. Like someone had shut the lights off for a split second, then turned them back on. And when it did, the sky was darker. Not night, but more aware. The second sun was closer now, bulging and still, but pulsing slightly, as if irritated. Elliot felt it in his teeth. A low hum. Not a sound, but a pressure, a vibration in his skull. He turned the mirror again. Now it reflected something. A house in the middle of an ocean. A lighthouse spinning its beam across an empty sea. He blinked, and it was gone. Only the field again. He looked at the mirror's back. The word had changed. Now it said, come. He didn't argue. He walked, and the world rewrote itself as he moved. Grass became sand. Hills flattened into dunes. The wind picked up, full of whispers that weren't language, just emotion. Regret, hunger, longing. Shapes in the distance watched from under the dunes. Some of them ducked too quickly. Others never moved. They were outlines of people who had stopped walking. The closer he got to the horizon, the more his body felt foreign, like it was being remembered instead of used. Muscles moved with slight resistance. Thoughts arrived out of order. He began forgetting names. Not of the people he'd met, his own. It took longer and longer to recall his first name. His middle. By the time he reached the shore, he could only remember the last name, Wynn. Waves crashed soundlessly against a dock made of stone teeth. Crooked, sharp, slick with tar. And at the end of the dock, a boat, black, unmanned, empty. The second sun hovered directly above it, not casting light now, pulling it in, like a mouth sucking in every beam. Elliot stepped aboard. The boat didn't move. It rewound. The water beneath spun backward, pulling him through images instead of space. He saw the house collapse again. He saw Clara reaching for him, Anna screaming in room 5, Thomas staring at him from behind the glass, the mirror maze, the hallway of hands, the phone, the forest, the museum, each flickered by like film being fed too fast through a projector, catching fire at the edges. Then stillness. The boat had stopped, but they weren't on water anymore. They were floating above a black void. Below him was nothing, not even shadow, just a sense of absence, as though this was where all the versions of him that were erased had gone. He looked up. The second sun loomed massive now, its surface wreathed, faces surfacing in the molten glow, his own face, over and over again, some screaming, some smiling, one just watching. Then, for the first time, the journal opened on its own. A single line bled across the page, written by something beneath the cover. Every story ends. The question is, do you follow it into the end, or become the one who writes what's next? The boat tilted forward. Elliot stood, looked into the eye of the second sun, and finally understood it wasn't a sun. It was a hole. And it had been reading him this whole time. Every decision, every hesitation, every name, every page. And now it was hungry for the last chapter, one he hadn't written yet. The journal's final page curled upward, empty and waiting, and a new word formed beneath his feet, glowing on the surface of the boat. Decide. But when he tried to speak, he realized the decision had already been made. Elliot didn't remember stepping off the boat, but he knew the moment his feet touched solid ground. It wasn't sand or stone or earth. It was memory. Tangible, shivering, bleeding memory. As if the past had been stitched into a surface. Each step sank a little deeper, not in weight but in meaning. Beneath him, whispers flared like sparks, with every footprint, arguments he'd forgotten, laughter he'd lost, words he never got to say. All of it there, murmuring just under the surface, like water under thin ice. The sky overhead had changed again. No sun, no stars, only the journal, now massive, floating in the void above him like a closing eye. Its pages turned slowly, each flap of parchment causing a shift in the air, as if time itself inhaled every time the paper flipped. He stood in the center of an invisible circle. No walls, no ceiling, but a sensation of being watched from all sides. All around him, doors began to open. Some familiar, room 5, the mirror hallway, the flickering nursery. Others he'd never seen before. A basement made of nothing but stairs. A room where the walls wept blood from wallpaper seams. A cave filled with clocks that ticked in reverse. Each door pulsed with color, sound, intention. Each one whispered the same word in different voices: choose. But Elliot no longer trusted doors. He walked past them, ignoring the pull, the promises. He had learned by now, if a door wanted you to open it, it wasn't because it was a way out. It was because something inside wanted in. The journal hovered lower, within reach. It had opened to a single, blank page. And for the first time, there was no prompt, no riddle, no demand, just space, waiting. Elliot knew what it wanted. He drew the pen from his pocket, the same one he'd used in the mirror house, the museum, the forest. Its ink was heavier now. Wet, pulsing with what could only be described as finality. His hand shook, not from fear, but from understanding. He wasn't writing an escape. He was naming the thing that had followed him since the beginning, the entity that had crawled through each version of reality he'd endured. The force behind the phone calls, the mirror doubles, the rooms with rules that bent when he looked away. It had never needed a shape. It only needed a story, and Elliot had been writing it the whole time. He raised the pen, wrote the name, slow, deliberate. Each letter dragged from a place deeper than memory. Each stroke final, as if carving into the world itself. When the last letter curled onto the page, the void around him breathed in. A single, deep inhale that pulled at the edges of everything. The doors slammed shut. The ground stilled. The journal closed. And for a moment, there was only silence. No wind, no thought. just silence so full it pressed on the ribs like weight. Then, a voice spoke, not in his ears, not from around him, from inside him. It wasn't the voice of a stranger, it was his own. The version that had been walking behind his eyes. The version that had watched and waited and whispered. The version that, now, stood in front of him, fully formed, fully smiling, and wearing his face like a mask that finally fit. "Thank you," the double said. "For what?" Elliot asked. "For finishing it. I didn't do it for you. You never do. But you always end up here, don't you?" The double looked up. The journal had begun to fall, slowly, page by page, like a feather soaked in ink. "When the story ends, one of us has to stay, one of us has to go. I know. Which one are you?" The double asked, head tilted. Elliot looked down at his hands. They were fading, not vanishing. Just unwriting. He smiled. "Not the version with the last word." The double nodded, and stepped backward into the shadows. Gone. The journal landed at Elliot's feet. The cover now bore a single title, The Mando o Rimburo Minuch. Below it, a subtitle etched itself into the leather, written by you. Elliot opened the cover. Blank pages. Every one of them, not with nothing, with possibility. The air shimmered. Light returned, not from a false sun, but from something deeper. Something earned. A real dawn. The first he'd seen in what felt like forever. And for the first time, there were no rules. No riddles. No reflections. Just the quiet hum of a world rebuilding itself around a man who had survived his own mind. He stepped forward into it, not through a door, not through a mirror, but through himself, and behind him the journal remained. Open, waiting, for the next name, for the next hand, for the next story. Because the house may burn, and the mirror may crack, and the phone may stop ringing, but the pages never run out. And someone, somewhere, will always pick up the pen.